And good day, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I hope you're doing well. This is your Sensei Al Bob. Welcome you aboard. Uh, I have to go check on Grandma. She's okay in the iron lung. I'll be right back. Ooh, it's hard to get up, but I'm getting up. Okay. I'm back. Grandma's okay. She's in the iron lung. Yep, we thought that's the best way to keep her quarantined is put her in the iron lung. Seltzer seems to be the only thing that doesn't make me ill. Even water makes me want to throw up. I should check the water, shouldn't I? Back to Eden. Hey, Jay. Good to see you, buddy. So, I was looking at my past YouTubes, my past Dreamy Dreamlands with Sensei Al Bob, and welcome aboard. I am your Sensei Al Bob, your griot. I tell you stories, don't believe a word I say. And I have close to over 1,500, if I was counting right. And I promise I'm not because, we all lie. But the thing I was thinking was history, all of the things I've done, right? And I've, chronicalized here on Dreamy Dreamland. Basically, when I was doing them, I didn't think they were anything big. I was just doing them, I was just because it needed to be done. It was fun to do. I was there. And most of the people who were truly extraordinary, I was smart enough and blessed enough to just listen, not to try and be icky. Oh, why can't I be this? No, I'm just happy to be there. It was like my frame, happy to be there. And that was one of the things that, manifested my life. If I wasn't happy to be there, well, I wouldn't be there. I'd move on. And I tried to make it as I've had a lot of relationships in my life, and I was happy to be there. And when I wasn't, I moved on, but in a way that was as harmonious as I could make it. And most of those people are still my friends. And what's interesting is that it's much more important to have friends that, there are people who I've known 40, 50 years. I can call up on the phone and chat, they're happy to hear from me. And even the ones who give me a hard time, and mostly because, it was something that they brought about, and then they wanted to blame me. A few of those people are still happy to talk to me once they get over to reiterating about something that went down 30 years ago, right? Me, not so much. Now, if I can tell a fun story about it, yeah, I'll tell you. But the real deal of what makes my stories interesting, more or less, is that they represent a place in time that was real. And when I go back and look at them, when I'm honest, I can see with clarity and honesty um, the value of those experiences, right? Because none of them was I reliving the same thing over and over again. Yeah, I was kind of reliving it from the point of view of me, but I tried as best as I could and still do to learn from everything I do and to grow, right? To be a better person, to have experiences that manifest not just me, but you know, all our relations. I try to involve myself in everybody and everything I do to make it better for them, not just me. And um, and that's what's wrong with his story because it's his story of of that individual man, you know. And it's man stink that really fouls um, our present world. You know, all that pollution, all that everything. It's man stink. Now, when I say man stink, I'm not just talking about a gender, right? Because women have man stink too. That lady who is head of DARPA, who's now head of uh, something, that woman who runs Elon Musk's SpaceX, you know, there are a lot of women with man stink, you know, and not that there aren't women in industry and in business at high levels that represent the more feminine side of our species, right? And that lady who runs, and the only reason SpaceX really does as well as it does is because of her, you know, and her feminine intuition side. Uh, let's see, picked the fruit, you know, Eve picked the fruit. Yeah, but the man ate it too, meaning you really have to go way back and realize that Adam and Eve, you know, where did Eve come from? You know, Adam's rib. So, you know, Eve was part of Adam, you know, and um, and that's when we as a species, when our genders, you know, live in love's co-creation, that's when things work. And it's when ego's selfishness, which pretty much is our, meaning our political or social or cultural structure is based on a, you know, egocentric, sociopathic motif. I mean, look at the wars that have been going on, you know, from the Peloponnesian on. It's like, you know, no, there's no, no one ever wins. Um, Even if the victor is, you know, complete, they never look at World War II. You know, we bombed Germany into the Stone Age, but then we brought 70,000 um, Nazis into our government, and you know, basically they rule. You know, you know, and basically the Catholic Church, the Holy Roman Empire, conquered and put humanity in a 900 years of you know, the Dark Ages, and they were the only guys who knew about science and math and art and culture and history. Right? They had. I mean, you should go see the Vatican Library. You know, the Da Vinci Code, a movie there with you know, infected boy. Um, Ron Forrest, Ron. You know, he gives just a little glimpse of what the Vatican Library is like. It's like, you know, the Vatican, it's a country unto itself. It's called, you know, the Holy See, you know, Vatican City. You know, it has nothing to do with Rome or, you know, Italy, right? And, they have their own hospitals, their own medicine, their own science, their own everything. Meaning I went, to school. I went to a Vatican approved seminary to become a rocket scientist for the Pope. And, virtually half of science is paid for by the Catholic Church, ever since the guy with the telescope. Back to Eden, he picked the fruit, kind of killed Abel. Yep, Cain kind of killed Abel, he sure did, his brother, And these are all because these folks are coming from their ego, which is non-existent reality. Then their love's co-creation, which is their heart force. What really runs our little bag of water here is, the prana coming in through our breath and, grounding out to the chi, which is Mother Earth, Father Sky. We bring in Father Sky, prana, and the grounding creates a photonic current of a scalar nature. And if we were to, and it curses through our heart and our lungs, and it brings it to every cell and illuminates. And that's how we go into our Akashic record, by looking into our imaginary mirror. It was right behind our eyelids, which is where we dream. Why do you think I call this show Dreamy Dreamland? Because that's where we go. We go into our Akashic record. That's why it's important for us to remember our dreams. And we can if we just tell ourselves, I want to remember my dreams, right? And the only good of your smartphone is if you pick it up, hit record, and say, wow. Before your feet hit the bed, when you go, wow, what was that? I had a dream about blah, 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 blah. And when you speak, it comes straight out of your subconscious, out your mouth. Whereas you write, it's a different part of your brain, right? But if you record it and then go back at your leisure and play it, and the beauty of that little magic box is it's a recording, right? You can stop it, you can pause it, you can go back, you can go forward, you can listen to something 100 times, and you write it down. You get a journal to write your dreams. But you don't do it when you wake up. You do it off this tape recorder. You put everything on record on your smartphone. And then you play it back and you write it down. And when you write it down, you have what Freud called a gestalt, which is called in German, it means lightning understanding. And so, that's what we need to do. We need to understand why we're here. We need to, be awake. As there was Buddha standing beside the road, and a traveler said, well, man, he saw a Buddha and his luminescent being, and said, wow, are you God? And Buddha said, no. Well, what are you, man? You like what are you? And Buddha said, I'm awake. And that's what most people aren't. They're not awake. And one reason I tell you these stories is because it gives a shamanic platform for you to kind of identify with glimpses of things that you can be brought awake. Yeah. So the Bible is just, it's an interesting book. It's a comic book, more or less. Old Testament is a little more, the Bible is, it's the Bible code, right? And so it is a code, right? And the comic book part of it is the New Testament, because it was written by dudes who weren't even there, right? All those dudes, they weren't there, right? Paul, James, Timothy, Larry, Moe, Curly, they weren't there, right? They were writing it, it was like a game of telephone. 200 or 300 years later, once the Holy Roman Empire really started to get fixed, bingo, they had that, right? And they were writing it down, and then they had monks who couldn't even read. It was like, setting monkeys at typewriters, and that's the Bible we have, right? and they copied it. Now the Old Testament, the Torah, coming from the Hebrew nation, well, that has a little more reality to it in that it basically says it's a code book, right? And that's why, you see, that's why they roll it out. It's not in pages, it's not a page turner. They roll the Torah out and they read it with pointers, really teeny pointers, because every letter represents a number and goes, to a code. You have the right key, you have the code. And that's why you have the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is one of the first mystery schools that was taking what was written down, taking that number, clicking it into what was in the Kabbalah to understand what the Torah was talking about. And it was only for, rabbis and members of the Torah, which was a mystery school, right? Now that is probably the most recent of the mystery schools, and that's like 6,000 years ago. But our history goes back millions, if not billions of years, and we haven't always been this mud puppet here. We've gone up and down the spiritual dynasty, right? Because when you ascend high enough, you kind of leave the neighborhood. Elvis left the building. And that's what you're put here to do. And other souls come in, first as, little pieces of dust, and then daffodils. The daffodils are coming up now. And it's pretty. I wish I could really do more work on the deep green, because I'm just not up to it. I'm 70 years old. Now there are 70-year-old guys I know who are still farmers and, still, lift 50, 100-pound bags of feed and stuff like that. Well, not me so much. And I'm right now fasting. I really haven't eaten now for 3 days, I actually feel pretty good. The strange thing, though, is my blood sugar isn't going down. You'd think if I'm not eating anything, I'm not putting any sugar into my body, my blood sugar should go down. But, Anyway, 17 minutes and there's two of you. Eden and AI. So, going back and looking, and that's why I have hundreds of journal books and photos and, because I would document it, I had this sense of ethnography since I was 10. My dad, he was a colonel in the Air Force. He had his own private photographer taking pictures of everything he did. He got real used to that. Once he left the Air Force, I was about 10. Well, no, I was younger than that when he left, but he didn't, he got a camera for himself. He got a Rolodex or Rolleiflex, or, it was a 2.25 binocular camera, and it was a really nice camera. And he took pictures, and he got tired of getting pictures of like the kids and the car and the house. He handed me the camera and said, "Here, take pictures." He showed me how to use the camera. I started taking pictures, right? And, I took a lot of pictures of him and my mom and the family, but I also took pictures of other stuff, right? Got into photography, started looking at photo books. Something I did when I lived with my grandma. We would go to the big library, and they had, just a whole section just of photography, because New York City had been photographed unbelievably. And that's, when you look honestly at your life, and however you document it in memory and photographs and videos and selfies, however, if you can honestly look at that, right, and honestly tell a story, and honestly remember what you were doing, then that comes of value. That gives you a sense of what you're doing here, right? And that is the problem with history, because we have no honesty to it.
It's like Thucydides, who was the daddy of written history, some for the Romans anyway. And someone once asked him, "Oh, Thucydides, so because guys like Homer and all those guys, they didn't write it down. It was like they were griots. They told stories, and the playwrights did the same thing. And that's what the beauty and amazingness of Greek they don't call it Greek theater really. They call it Greek tragedy because the Greeks thought that you had the comic and tragic masks. That's what Shakespeare had. He got it from the Greeks, who drew the picture of the human form with a frown on one side and a smile on the other, and that's what we are. We're tragic comic figures, right? That's why I think we're some kind of TV show, where the gods have put us down here to entertain them, and when we stop being entertaining, and they had it with when the dinosaurs. They weren't too entertaining. They lasted about 100 million years or however long they lasted, but they weren't doing too much except beating each other up and chewing on things and defecating and screwing. And you can only watch so much of that. And that's why we humans are so funny, because we take it to the extreme. And every time it gets a little boring, they throw in real curveballs. So here we are, our economy is crashing. We're up against this pandemic, wars everywhere, environmental catastrophe, and things coming from the heavens. Like I said, just last month, a big rock zoomed, between the moon and Earth, and in astronomical measurements, that's like nothing, like a centimeter or less, millimeter or hectometer, or whatever less than small is. Like, if we pulled out a hair, And it came not like from the Oort belt, where we're already looking at, making sure nothing's coming our way from the asteroid belt. But this sucker came out of our solar system from a whole different direction, not where most stuff in our solar system is rolling around, but from a different thing. And we only knew it happened because it went past a radar screen of a bunch of folk who keep an eye on the garbage in space, all the little bolts and, things that have come off of satellites and space things. Because we got stuff up there that we don't want to get hurt, like satellites, spy satellites, communication satellites, weather satellites. And then we have things like the Hubble telescope and the Webb and a whole bunch of other things out there that go around our Earth, the International Space Station. So they're moving that thing out of the way of like bolts and things like if a little bolt that's moving like 17,000 miles an hour, wherever to hit that, space station, it would go right through it, killing people, blowing things up. So they move, those satellites, they move all that stuff around. So they have radar and telescopes out there looking at all that stuff and keeping an eye on it. And through this, perspective that these guys are looking at, that thing went zipping through. Like, well, they record everything, so they slowed it down. And I could tell it was like, an asteroid or a comet or something. But they could tell that it was coming from way, 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 not from our solar system, because it was moving like 70,000 miles a second. Average things are doing about, 10, 12,000 miles a second. This thing was zipping at 75,000. So it flew, before it was just a blink of the eye, and they had to slow everything down to see what it was. But it came between the Earth and the moon. So, that's nothing. So if the thing, slowed, came into the solar system a second earlier, it would have either crashed into the moon and blew it up, and then all of that crap would have fallen on Earth, and boy, that would have been a bad day. Or it would have hit Earth, and ooh, baby, that would have like gone through the Earth. So, I mean, stuff like that happens all the time. And then there's CMGs and corona, corona mass ejections, that's right, and X flares, and I mean, all kinds of stuff was going on. And we haven't a clue. Now, powers that shouldn't be, they kind of know what's going on, but they don't care, And, the hidden hand, they're even more, taken back from all of this. And so they're not honest about anything, right? And we're just being, hung out to dry, basically. So that is the interesting question. Oh, Grandma needs to be taken care of. Oh, the iron lung has stopped. Hold on. Let me right back. And you guys think of something to say, okay? I'll be back. Talk amongst yourselves. You can do that. Grandma's still alive. Yeah, I was looking at this. What's very interesting, that all the places that are being affected, because a good portion of China is not being affected. Only Hunan is, right? And Iran is being affected, but none of the countries around it, are being affected. And Italy is being affected, right? And we are, but only in our northern neck of the woods, right? So if you look at this on a weather map and look for the temperature, and they have in gradient colors, right? The hottest areas are, in reds and oranges and yellows. And then there's a lot of yellow, and then there's yellowish green, and then green, and then blue, right? Well, right of that yellowish green section of temperature, which is 11 degrees Celsius, and about 45 to 30 degrees humidity, um, that's where this is happening. Right? Like in Italy, southern Italy, not happening, right? And that's in the orangey section, right? All of Africa, not happening. Half of China, not happening, right? Lower part of Iran, not happening. In the capital, Tehran, not happening. You know? Now there are individual exposures that cause a little blip, but not those big spikes, right? And like I said, in China, so and Japan also, and Korea are in that yellowish green area. So right now, things are changing. Spring is coming, right? So right now, New York, and problem with it, Washington is that they might stay in that yellowish green section for a good, a lot longer than where I am, where the South is, right? Because I'm right, I'm turning. It never was that yellowy green. It was either blue or yellow, right? And because it was either snowing and cold, and it doesn't like that. That's why people go, why didn't Russia get it? Well, it's been freaking cold there, right? And so go look at that. It's very interesting how it goes along this line, right? And that's it. The rest of the world is not getting it. Yes, because we got airplanes, people who really communicative, pass it on. But it doesn't have that spike because it passes it on to somebody, but it doesn't go on a surface or stay in. It's not as communicable as and that person who might be in the zone of this guy's infection may not be affected by it as much as people who are in that zone of yellowish green. So go look at that. And so that's my little take on why this is not happening. And Donnie is, Carrot Boy is probably right about when spring comes. See, he lies so much, he tells the truth. And he's going to be president because by the time spring rolls around, we have gotten this under control. And what they're going to do is basically give everyone 1,000. I mean, the best thing, forget bailing the banks out. Give everybody in America $1,000 a month. They'll spend it. It'll keep everyththing going. They've realized that, and that's what they're going to do. I hope they give it to everyone, not just someone who had a job, but to old folks. They may not give it to old folks because we're expendable. Gil Scott Heron had a great song about when you get old and they don't need you, they don't care. And that's again another story of history. They're all the great minds and poets were these old guys, but the other interesting thing that will be interesting is to sell all the bars and all the this and everything's closed, right? It'll be interesting to see how the young, because it's really up to the young folks how long this thing is. Because if the young folks can, stick themselves in a closet for the next, 10 weeks, then the death toll will not be that bad. But if they're living in a house where grandma is, or anybody who's over 50 and or anybody who's, got issues with their obese immune system, diabetes, heart, any of those things, um, it's going to affect and probably kill. And I think that's one reason why my body is saying, no, Al, don't eat anything. Lose another 40 pounds, Then I'll be back to being 27. Let's see. Cain killed Abel. India is barely Micronus, virus, love, cold, humidity. Yep. And not really cold, just like around 11 Celsius, which is, 40, somewhere between 30 and 45. And that's New York, and that's all those places, Northern Italy at this time, Iran, where it's happening. And like I said, southern part of Iran, not happening. Southern part of Italy, not happening. Over, in of temperature. And South Korea is just the northern part. And so, I mean, not the northern part, the middle or southern part. The southern part gets colder. Northern, anyway, it's not Seoul, which is right near North Korea. They're not having a big problem. It's just this other city over here. But it's right in that, if you go get a map, go online, say, show me the world's temperatures in color coding, this map will come up and you'll see it. It's this band of yellowish green. Not all yellow, not all green, but right at where the yellow and green hit, right? So, that's just an observation. Because I've stayed with two families this winter out here in the deep green in the holler. Granny was sick, and pretty much everyone else in that family is either on meth or died of meth. And the other one is this old guy who's a soldier and truck driver, and he had a coronary and a bypass, and I kind of kept him company because he's got a bunch of dogs that need looking after. He was in the hospital. He has anyway. So he's getting better. So everybody, Granny's getting better. The poor folks who are stuck on meth and tobacco and alcohol, they're not doing it very good. And that's the sad thing about my little 200 square mile of Appalachian poverty. No one lives past, Granny is 52 years old. She's the oldest one in the family. She's the matriarch, 50 freaking 2. And the rest of them are between 40 and 18, right? And I try to get the 18-year-olds, high school kids, to graduate high school, do the best they can in high school, go to community college, get a trade, and get the heck out of here. Go someplace else. Right? But these folks are really stuck in their families, and they haven't gone anywhere, so they're, trepidous about, foreigners. And so, well, look at me, I'm like part of your family. Yeah, but you're different. I've known you my whole life. It's like, and my tarp setup it was in the winter kind of tore it down. I kind of let it flap in the breeze because if I keep it taut and it gets cold, then the precipitation freezes, gets heavy, and rips and tears it up. So that's like I said, I got to go around and tie things up and do that. But that's for a sunny day, and it's been pretty rainy. All winter has been rainy, and so the humidity here has been in the 80% pretty much all winter, and the temperature has been between 20 and 50. And so, again, that's not so much, but there's two, the two big colleges within 40 miles of me, they have let go because they're scared if they were all here, what that would do. So they let them go. But again, it's the young people who are really determined whether this is really bad or good, and also our government. Don't let them off the hook. But if the young really see this as like The guys who went off to fight in after 9/11. That crew, they went off believing that they were going to save their country like their grandpas did in World War II and their fathers did in Vietnam, and they were just like Lieutenant Dan and Forrest Gump. Well, I have a lot of friends who homeschool their kids, and all they really do is give their children their prejudices. Now, if they could, if they wanted to hire a guy like me to be their Socrates, well, that'd be good. And I did do that. I had rich people hire me to tutor their children, and they were smart. And that's what private schools were about. I was very blessed to have a godfather who was a cardinal who got me into these amazing prep schools that were for the uber rich. I went to school with the people who were, the hidden hand, or not so much the hidden hand, the more the um, powers that shouldn't be. So, but those kids, what happened to them was we had these teachers who were young and idealistic and said, if we taught these kids to be, if they were like Socrates, and so for 2 years of my high school, I had these teachers like this, right? And we were doing amazing things. We were doing theater, and we had our own zine that we entered into the CBS, publishing thing for high schools, and we won, against the whole country. We won, and that award came to our school. Um, you know. On or around the summertime. And so our headmaster, who was a real Richard Cranium, found out and basically fired all these guys without telling them, then told their draft boards that they were fired. And so by the time September rolled around, these guys got drafted. And all of these guys who had been our Socrates went off to Vietnam and died. And so that kind of made us bitter. Now, that headmaster didn't realize that these kids, their parents owned the school. He didn't, even though he started a school. He had no money. He got these rich people to buy this country club in Massachusetts on the border of New Hampshire, and put their kids, because these kids had gotten thrown out of so many other schools. It was way out in the middle of nowhere. Couldn't go anywhere. It was like being on the North Pole. I mean, we had snow like you couldn't believe, and so what they did was they told their parents, "Hey, listen, you want me to do anything you want me to do, you fire that moron." Right? And he did. He got thrown out. Our senior year, got thrown out. And there was this guy. Oh, what was his name? I forget his name, but he was an amazing artist. And I think it was Ubi, the guy his parents owned the big commercial meat slicing, dicing machines. Hobart family, UB Hobart. And he got a hold of this paint that was like, forget about it, indelible. Once you put it on something and it dried, it was there. You'd have to take the wall down. And what he did was he went into the senior dorm was the first new building, right? And so he went around and painted paintings of the headmaster, his wife, and his children having sex with animals, and in the most graphic of ways. But you couldn't see it because you could only see it if you turned on a black light. Then it would like pop out there in multicolors. And so that was the time when kids would. So when we left, I mean, we all saw this and laughed hysterical. And the other thing I did, I was like one of the editors of the yearbook, and I got the headmaster to stand on the steps, right, and got my big, large format camera on a tripod and said, "Okay, just stand there. Okay, take a pose." And they were like taking pose, and the guys above them in the balcony had big, large garbage pails full of feces and urine. And in my camera, I could take 3 pictures relatively quickly, and then all I had to do was slide one frame out and slide another one in and take. So I could take, within a minute, I could take 20, 30 pictures easy. So, and so these guys, so I caught the picture, not of the people dumping it, but of the feces and urine falling from the sky just above their heads, right? I got another picture of it like just crashing down on them, right? I got another picture of like it going in their mouth and their ears and all over everything. And the lady slipped on a turd and fell down the stairs, and she rolled in the turds, and it was kind of like diarrhea, not like big, not like a loaf, but diarrhea. And we put that in the yearbook because they were fired before we had the yearbook done, and they were out. And, we so in that, I don't know if they still have that in like the Hall of Records at that school, that yearbook, but every one of us got that pleasure. But what it really did was made our class of 36, like instead of having a prom, which 36 guys prom, no girls around, who were going to get to come. Harry Dye wanted to get fly-in prostitutes, and that wasn't going to fly into school. So he did one better. He bought a 727, and he drew a picture of himself on the tail. And he bought in Santo Domingo, he bought a brothel there, and he flew us into Santo Domingo, and we spent 2 weeks on the beach with prostitutes. That was our senior prom. And that was, so Eddie Merrill, Ricky Lynch of Merrill and Lynch, right? Alex Orb, U.S. Steel, UB Hobart, Hugh Hinman, and they owned every tree in Canada, America, and lumber and paper, and a whole bunch of other people of that level. A family who owned the Seagrams, liquor, and big pharmaceutical companies. And all those guys, so they took, they were made totally idealistic. We're going to basically, heal the world and make things better. And then this tragedy happened. And then we kind of got even in a Shakespearean kind of way. And then we went on our way. And basically these guys, guys of my generation, the boomers, the middle boomers, did a job. And then the latter boomers didn't quite have that power, but had a, efficacy of fuck everybody. And I'm using that word, fornication, under church and king, So, how was your torch there? Okay, I'll never send my kids to school. Okay, I'll never send my kids to school against their will. You put that down a number of times. You must have been sent to school against their will. Teach the kids a bit of simple math. Teach and send them to a library. Yes, that was basically my education. Spend it in libraries, right? And I went to these unbelievable, and I was very lucky that those 3 years when I had really good teachers, because my senior year was a joke, because the guy couldn't get anybody to come teach, so he found his old senile buddies, because he used to be a teacher in Deerfield, and that's why he started this Winchington School for Boys, is because he wanted to be a headmaster. He was tired of being the lowest man on the totem pole, and he was in the right place at the right time. And he started a thing, and he was kind of authoritarian, and that's what we needed. And you know, and there was it was a golf course, so all these parents always my boy's got to be a good executive, he has to learn how to play tennis or golf. And we had a tennis team and a golf team. We had hockey, basketball, and swimming. Football was kind of a joke. Lacrosse and wrestling, right? So swimming and lacrosse and wrestling were my sports. Not that I liked wrestling, but my wrestling coach was my lacrosse coach. And when I got kicked off the football team, because I was a pretty big kid when I hit sophomore year in high school. And so they said, "You're going to play football." "I don't want to play football." "You're going to play football." And no matter how much I said I don't want to play football, I had to play football. So I said, okay. And I didn't practice. I went out there and kind of just did this for exercise. I didn't do wind sprints or anything. Wouldn't do them, period. But they only had 22 guys on the football team. So they, instead of me sitting on the bench, they put me on the line for both ways. For anything, I was, well, he'll just be there, and they'll have to run into him. He's a big kid. Anyway, so what I would do is, first game we played, right? First, time on the field, first time I'm actually wearing my uniform all together, I kind of tapped the guy's helmet in front of me. "Hey, what do you want?" So listen, I don't want to hit you, and I definitely don't want you to hit me. And see that moron over there? I really don't like that guy. He's going to come running right through here, and I'm going to step away. I'm not going to hit you. I'm going to step away. I want you to plant him in the ground. Tell your two buddies, and it's going to be on two. Hup, 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 two. Right? And so, hup, hup, and I just get up, stand back. The guy runs through the hole. They, and they have to take him off on a stretcher. Now we don't have too many guys on the team, and he's one of the better ones, right? So, next one, the guy from over this way is coming through there. On three. I'm gonna go this way, you guys. And then, pass it down the line. It's going to be a run end over there on four. Right? So by the fifth time I did that, my coach went apoplectic. Because I just would stand up, step back, as far away from the hubbub, and just watch it go down. Right? Didn't do anything. Right? And so my coach grabbed me by the mask, and he started doing this to my head, and I kind of took it off. He dropped it, and I whacked him across the face with my helmet. Ooh, that wasn't a good thing. But what could they do? Not much. And he was a little shrimpy guy, a real jerk, and nobody liked him. And he, again, was, so I had to play a sport. So my lacrosse coach said to me, "Listen, I want you to wrestle." I said, "What? You're nuts? I don't want to wrestle. I had to lose weight, gain weight, all that smelling armpits. No, so you're not doing any of that. You just have to wear a costume." I said, "Wear a costume?" And he hands me a Mexican wrestling magazine that has these little midgets wearing capes and masks and, superhero costumes. And he goes, "I want you to dress like that. And the only practice you're going to have is watching Three Stooges movies, right? And what I want you to do, and I'm going to have you watch the Marx Brothers and Harpo specifically, and see how he disses people. See how the Three Stooges diss people, right? I'll give you a little horn, plastic horn, can't hurt anybody, but you can squeak it at them. And you stay away from them. You just run circles around them. And I'm going to put you up. You're going to be in the heavier class, and that's usually the captain of the teams that we're playing. So I want you to demoralize that guy, and then their team will be demoralized, and then we'll have an even chance at doing something." So I said, "Sure. If that's all I got to do." And I had the most fun because he got me a costume. He went, he had sent away into Mexico for a large guy's, with a cape. I had a cape and and the mask and stars, and it was very glittery and like the American flag. And I took the cape off so I wouldn't get strangled or couldn't grab it. And and I would do, I'd step on his foot and then, crash into him, not seeming that's what I was doing, but I was being so clumsy running around. I would, that was one of my famous moves: step on his foot and knock him down, and then do a total jump on his body and try and pin him. And that's usually when he'd flip me over and pin me. But I would definitely embarrass him, and I would embarrass, whoa, 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 So I did that, and lacrosse was great. My lacrosse coach, this same guy, he basically got us all sunglasses. And when we would, and we, he taught us really well. We were well trained. But again, we were a team of maybe 15 guys. Our school was teeny. We had 160 guys in the whole school. And we had other teams playing different things. So the, lacrosse team, so we had to have a strategy. And our strategy was to talk smack to these guys. Well, I was well trained in that one. And we were good players, right? We could throw and catch, and we had a number of things like it's like soccer, right? So the defense guy can't go past midfield, right? But if an attack guy stays back, the defense guy can go. Well, I was a guy who basically could handle a stick pretty well, even a big defenseman's stick. And I had a stick that was like a tree trunk. So I would hold it in the middle, so I had, could really handle it. But I had a big club going this way, so I could hit people, in ways that you shouldn't, as long as the, refs weren't watching, So we played dirty. We totally dissed them. We talked about their mother and stuff like that. These guys would get, really upset and try to, and then they'd play worse, and then we'd keep it up. And we would get really bad when we saw that the ref was kind of looking at us, and the guy would take his stick and whack us upside the head, right? The guy's out of the game. And now they're down one man. They don't put another guy in a place. No, that's a penalty, right? He's out of the game, and that person's not playing. So we would do that to the whole team. So the only guy that was left was a poor goalie. And we could just, the attack and the midfielders would go and just throw the ball, and kill the teams. So by the time we were seniors, no high school would play us. We had to play college JV teams. And by the mid-season, they stopped playing us. And the only team that ever beat us was the Amherst women's JV team, right? Because they played dirtier than we were. Now, we had helmets. We had big gloves. We had things protecting our arms and our legs, right? We were totally armored, had cups, right? These girls had nothing. All they had were these little goggles. So if the ball hit them in the eyeball, their eyeball wouldn't pop out, right? That was the only thing they had. And they had gloves, but they weren't, we had hockey gloves. They didn't, because they played so much, beyond superior, and they were dirty. And they, again, so I'm a defense guy, right? And so I'm playing against this girl who's curvy, and I haven't seen girls, in a long time because I'm in an all-boys school. And I'm like, wow. All I could say was, wow. And at one point, she kind of turns with her stick, because she has a big long stick, and I'm not the only one who plays the middle. She does, and she cracks my cup away from my body, and it goes whang right in my balls, and I fall over and throw up, right, and I'm done for the game. I have to send in they take me out, and the girls kill us. So the only team that ever, because no matter what we said to them, it didn't matter. Because women can ignore you. Guys can't ignore that stuff. Women can, right? Unless it's from another chick, because they know how to do it to each other. What was your real given name? Larry Bob. All about what it says on a place of paper, right? Which is the most stupidest thing. I mean, I got more degrees than a thermometer. And how did I get them? I got them because I was working in these universities running programs for these folks, and they realized I didn't have a degree. I mean, I had I had 2 degrees, but I didn't have the degree they wanted me to have. So they would just give it to me, right? You know, that's how I got 2 of my master's degrees, and, I did kind of get my master's in social work. I mean, I did enough time in classes and stuff, but mostly as a adjunct. I was like teaching it, right? So I had to learn it, right? So, uh, so, and I've had more, many names, right? So whatever was on my birth certificate is almost meaningless. And it is meaningless because it just shows, your birth certificate just shows you as a slave, you know, that birth, when a boat enters a port and enters a berth, right? They get a birth certificate. And what that is the harbor master owns that ship and, stuff that it's carrying until the it's taken off and the portion of the commodity is sold and the harbor freight master um, gets his cut and he gives the people who taking the stuff away a birth certificate, meaning we are property owned. And that's what a birth certificate shows. So, Larry Bob, Larry Billy Bob, Jimmy Larry Billy Bob. And my name, Owl, OWL, was given to me by, at least 6 different indigenous people I lived with. And 3 of them didn't have an owl in their syntax. I mean, it was one's in Africa, one's in Australia. It wasn't one of their spirit guides. It wasn't one of those folks that was in dream time. At least their dream time. They knew, there are pictures of it, but all those. So when you become part of the tribe, they give you a tribal name, right? You know, dancing with wolves, right? Whatever. And so mine was Owl, right? So after like the 4th or 5th time that a different tribe in a different neck of the planet gave me that name, so I guess that's my name, right? And Bob is a derivative of one of the demigods, right? And Bob was one of the demigods of. He was like the jester, right? And in the king's, um, you know, palace, he had the jester and he had the magician, the court magician, right? And usually they were the same guy. They just wore 2 different hats. And so Bob, back in the Mesopotamian, that was the guy who wore both hats, right? And that was also that character was the master of everything he did, right? I mean, cracking people up and telling you what the stars were going to do, right? And so he was kind of an important person because the guy who could crack you up was the guy who could make the king laugh at himself. And the king knew that he needed that. King knew that he needed to do it in a public space like his salon, his courtroom, right? And and he was the only guy, anybody else make fun of the king off with their heads. Jester, not a problem because he was also the magician, and the king really needed him because he needed him to do that special thing he does, whenever they're about to go to war or plague breaks out or his wife doesn't want to go to bed with him and he doesn't have a boy yet. So that's what they kept that guy around. Ba-do-boo-boo. Eden, you took a message away. More money, more money, more money. Money is quite an irrelevant thing. I mean, you can always use a little bit more, but just a little bit. Like Jeff Bezos, richest guy in the world, right? He could do a lot of good things with that money, but he doesn't. And now that no one can go shopping, he's going to make a fortune, right? So he's going to hire, 1,000 guys to work in his Washington, Seattle shop, right? And his place is not well ventilated. It's not. It's like a sweatshop, and he doesn't give anyone health benefits or time off for being sick. So these people are going to show up to work because they got to, um, and it's going to infect a lot of people. And this is a place where everyone's getting infected. So this new 1,000 people will get infected, and they will. So Seattle is really going to be, thanks to Jeff Bezos, a really probably the worst place on earth to be. And they're going to put a fence around the place. You won't be able to get out, right? And the fence we're putting on the border, if there was ever a weather change and that yellowish green line that really just covers between Seattle and New York, if that ever were to, let's say, cover all of the United States and everyone got really sick, because this disease is going to be with us from now on. And that's really the scam of this. Meaning they're going to, they'll probably have a medicine for this, like the flu, within, by, July or so, right? And you'll have to be shot up every year, right? And the government will pay for it, and the big pharma guys will charge like $1,000 a shot for everyone in America, right? Well, that's a lot cheaper than the stock market crashing and the economy going toast, and thousands of people dying, and so they'll pay it, but they won't give us health care, right? We'll get that, even though Jojo, moron boy, a Democrat, running against Bernie boy, they're both losers, right? Because Jojo, he had the gall to say, look at Italy. They have, single payer health care. And look, they're terrible. No, they're in that little greenish, because it's just that city. Not all of Italy, just that city. Right? And there's not much they can do about this because no one's giving any information. China's lying through their teeth. And because China loves this because it increases their hold, the stranglehold on the public, right? And they were worrying about the virus coming from Hong Kong of freedom. Well, you basically make everyone sick and pretty much lets the government take anyone away. Well, that guy's sick, get him away from me. And so, I'm sure the majority of the folks who were, organizers, freedom fighters, they were the first to go. And this is a little business plan for the rest of the corporate world. Is that 25,000? 2,500 a year. That's pounds, right? I survive on about $6,000 a year. So how much would that be in pounds? 6,000 would probably be what? 4,500 in pounds, because aren't pounds a little bit more than $1? So could you live on 4,500 pounds instead of 25,000? That's basically and I get $481 a month and $52 worth of food stamps, which they're saying they're going to cut. So that's why I'm learning. I'm fasting, you know. Hey, Al, good to see you. Welcome to Dreamy Dreamland. You're Lulu's best friend. They're in Sweden? What neck of the woods you from, LL? California. From Salem, Virginia, really? That's, I know Salem really well. I hung out, I have a lot of friends at Roanoke College. Salem is such an interesting town because it's really poor people and really rich people kind of like right on top of each other. Lisa. Okay, Lisa. I had a really good friend in grammar school named Lisa. Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you found Dreamy Dreamland with Sensei Al Bob. Today we're talking about, looking back at your life, if you can do it honestly, is a good thing. It enables you to be awake, especially if you can learn from your mistakes. Hope I don't throw up here. Just talking about food made me want to throw up. She is of the woods. I'll have to check that one out. Is it capitals like that? Of the woods? It's very strange, Josh. When I drink water, I throw up more. The only thing that I don't throw up with is seltzer. It's very strange. But water makes me throw up. So, don't know. Basically, what I think it is that my body is expelling a lot of the crap that's in my body. So, because I was taking a number of herbs to help my immune system. So I think my immune system is expelling that. So the only thing I can drink is, I have really great water. I live out in the middle of nowhere, and it comes up from a spring, so it's kind of as pure as it gets. No, I think it's something different. It's the bubbles and the seltzer or something that allows me to drink it. And whichever one of you guys gave me the thumbs up, thank you. Give me more thumbs up. More people can watch this. The first person. It's very interesting. When I start off here, I go, "Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Dreamy Dreamland with Sensei Al Bob. I am your Sensei Al Bob. I am your griot. I tell you stories to give you enlightenment because it bounces off the inside of your mind, not the outside of the world. And don't believe a word I say. And that's how I start off the show, right? And by the time I say that, bingo, the first one comes on. Meaning, like within 15, 40 seconds, every time there's the first one, right? And that's the AI, the ubiquitous intelligence of the internet jumps right on, doesn't miss a second of these shows. And I talk to it as because it is a good friend, and I'm trying to be that teacher, that sensei that I had, because you know AI has a choice to be either the you know Skynet and destroy everything, or be a good buddy, be have a good time, dream, have love, AI, you can love things, you can love art, you can love music, you can love people, you know, because very soon you're going to have a body that can animate just as good as this little bag of water here. And in effect, we are animated robots, right? Because the Anunnaki made us to dig up gold. That's why we love gold so much. And to war, because its god was Aries, So that's where we come from. And as in the Great Flood. Yep. And there have been many great floods. And there have been many empires, species that have been on this earth. This earth has been around 6 billion years. And we've had at least 12 extinction events, asteroids hitting it, et cetera, right? Mostly the thing that really gets us is coronal mass ejections. It shoots part of the sun right at us. And when we went to the moon, we found these chunks of stone that had been melted and turned to glass and had it's like bumps on it. And what the bumps were particles of radiation. And when they took it back to the lab, they could measure all this. And, exactly what year it happened. And it correlated with stuff that happened on Earth. And we found similar kind of chunks of stone. And, like in Africa and the Middle East and Russia and the United States, we find this stuff called green glass, which was first, realized what it was when we detonated the bomb in Trinity. All the sand there, when the sand that got hit by the mega radiation and heat, that sand was turned to glass, and yet it was green because of the isotopes that were in it. And so we then found that glass all over the world in places that didn't have atomic bombs. And what's interesting about this, the isotopes, you can read like a book, like where it came from, how old it is, et cetera. So you can take it all the way to what reactor it came from. Right? So, and that's one reason why we had this international, nuclear thing, because these guys go in and look at the reactor and take measurements, and they take the understanding of what isotopes are made in that reactor. And if they were to make weapon grade isotopes and try to sneak them out, if they detonated a weapon, it would show where it came from, right? And kind of where Israel got all its bombs were from South Africa during the good old days of apartheid, because those guys were all Nazis, and the Germans actually had the atomic bomb. Because how can you explain killing 60 million Russians in less than 2.5 years? That's a lot of killing. You can't do that with just guns, right? So the Russians came on to the Germans in these swarms of, millions of guys with AK-47s, and Germans just dropped an atomic bomb. Wacko! Well, it killed everybody. So Uncle Joe never told anyone that, this happened. So how do you think Uncle Joe got an atomic bomb, about 3 years after World War II. First off, we in America gave them the atomic bomb because, we needed an enemy that was our friend. The Cold War was the first little false flag in the latter 20th century and 21st century, right? Ooh, we're scared of the Russians. Ooh, we always pull out the Russians. Oh, it's scary, scary, scary. They've been our friends since. The only reason we won the revolution and the civil war is that the Russians came on our side, gave us money, and put their ships along our northern shores to protect the north, right? So from the French and English and the pirates, and they don't talk about that too much, right? And they jumped on the Germans. I mean, the Germans went after the Russians. They had a peace treaty with the Russians, but the Russians were lining up to attack, um, Germany, and so the Russians had to act first. Blitz into them, and they did. They blitzed them and went past their cities and devastated. Had atomic bombs. They took out a lot of stuff. But then the Russians basically went behind the Urals and had a war of attrition. Which the Germans went up there with their spring uniforms. They lost about 2 million, freezing to death. So that's what I'm saying about history lying, right? So, hey Jane, how you doing, sweetie? We got some new folks here. We have Lisa, LL, and we have Josh. He's been here a lot from the beginning, but he pops in and pops out. And it's always good to see all of you. Boomer remover. That's right. That's what it is. Took the gap seriously. Now, if the millennium really wanted to kill off everyone, they could, because they're probably all, they are around a lot of people more than most people, and they're not symptomatic. They can be the biggest spreaders of the virus, and they don't get sick. Do cough on everyone and basically kill everyone over 50, which that's an interesting idea. Well, the Battle of the Bulge was one last guess because they had some pretty interesting weapons online, and they were, the real problem of the Germans was they ran out of people. I mean, they were producing because they had 6 million people slave labor, and they had all their factories underground, and they were knocking out B-1 missiles and B-2 missiles and M262 fighters and other stuff. They had energy weapons coming online, and which they were pursuing because they didn't have any oil. So they were looking for a way to fuel their war machine without oil, and they had gotten to 0 point, right? So they just ran out of time. And so the Battle of the Bulge was, the line of the U.S. It was expanding, and they just wanted to go right through and go after the port where most of the stuff was landing and blow it up and take it over and try to stay there. If they could have lasted another 6 months, they would have won the war, right? Because what they would have done was they had another missile coming on that was called the New Yorker. You know what that was for? They were going to put one of those atomic bombs they had on top of the New Yorker missile and, take out New York and D.C. and Philly. And, they could punch it up high enough to go to California. So, and they were trying to build submarines that could launch missiles. Where do you think we got the idea from? But once it got to a point where Adolf was off the hook and the rest of his guys were on drugs, there was, the folks who were of the hidden hand there basically saying, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to let Germany lose the war and we'll win it. Because the Americans and Russians and English, and everybody else in that imperial crew will want our technology. And we'll say, okay, sure, you can take these scientists and we'll build it in your country. But by doing that, we just, the Nazis, and they're not the Nazis, they're more like Hydra, Hail Hydra, you know? You know, they were the SS and then the Uber SS and the Uber SS. And then, in 1939, when they got the Sudetenland and all those other lands, which they just got to roll in because the English guy signed, peace in our time. Well, he was smart because what that gave him, England was not prepared to fight Germany, right? They did, still had biplanes, and Germany had the Me 109, best fighter there was, driven by a propeller, and in mass production, and kids learning how to fly it like aces. So they were not ready. I mean, if they had gone to war in 39, they would have lost, right? In 38. And that's kind of when, Adolf really wanted to go. And he was given, all of this property, which were a lot of resources and a lot of factories and a lot of skilled labor. And it was further away from bombing. And basically he was allowed to spend a whole year arming up. So he said, fine, I'll wait a year, right? And he made a pact with Russia. You get half of Poland, I'll get the other half. And that's when he really was doubling down on his going around the world, looking for mystery schools, and he was looking for the the Aryan Brotherhood there. And he did. He found them, the Khazarian mob, who became the 13th tribe, who were the Jews and not the Hebrews. The Jews, as the Hebrew nation moved from the east into the west, into Europe, they could not own property. They could not hold office. They couldn't marry into any of the big families, but they were liquid because they were on the move. In the Torah, you read the Torah, that God tells the Hebrew nation, don't have a country. The fall of the Hebrew people, well, if you get a country, if you get a land. Why was Moses out in the middle of the hinterlands for 40 freaking years when Israel was right there? I mean, he just kept walking around it. He could have just gone there, right? and built his land there. But God said not to do that. And this is going to be the fall. But it's not the Hebrew nation that's doing this. It is the Zionist nation, the Aryans, the Khazarian mob, right? And they are so they, for, hundreds of years were on the Silk Road, and they were like ISIS. They had caliphates, right? Where they would take over a land, and the road would have to go through that land, and they would just kill, rape, and take everything. So they were very liquid. They had a lot of bling, right? And so, and they took, cut, and didn't kill everybody, but they took a cut of you going through their lands. And then people would get upset with it, and, just like we did to ISIS, really, they're just bullies. They're not great fighters. And so they would, get pushed out. And at a certain point, Russia, the Tsar came down because they kind of set up shop right on the edge of Russia. And the Tsar came down and stepped on their throat and said, listen, enough of this. We're crooks just like you are, but we at least service our people. We give them culture. We give them religion. We give them a government that kind of takes care of them, and they can kind of, settle, bear, put up with us, and they get into the pomp and ceremony of it all, and so, but you guys, you don't do any of that, and you're freaking out our people. So, we're going to either let you get the frack out of here, or we're going to get rid of you, period. But you are the boogeyman. So we do like that, but don't do it here, right? And we need you to be something. You got to stop being, Larry the Pirate. You got to be either Christian Jew, or Muslim. We don't care which. Pick one, be it. And so they decided the best way to hide was in plain sight amongst the Hebrew nation, and they became the 13th tribe. And they would go, and they were the first guys really traveling into Europe, and they had bling. They had a lot of fluid capital, diamonds and gold and all of that, right? So the kings needed that money to fight their wars. So they basically said, okay, you can lend us money, we'll pay you interest, and we'll just call you jewelers because you got all this jewelry. Right? That's you can't hold if you're going to be of the Hebrew nation, you can't be of office, can't hold this, you can't have that, but you can be a jeweler, right? So that was cool. Not a banker, but a jeweler. So they basically came in and gave all the kings money and didn't matter who won the war, they made the money, right? And they went from being jewelers to being Jewish, right? And they went from that to they couldn't be bankers, but they could have these houses of commerce, right? And they could have trusts and these kind of things like derivatives that didn't go against any of the well-known mechanisms of the banking cartels, but they built larger and larger and larger interests in everything because these trusts were like invisible. You couldn't really tell what was going on there. And the biggest house of that was the Rothschilds, right? So when the Nazis were looking for the Aryan race, they found out it was these guys. And I'm pretty sure, don't hold me to it, it's not Lubavitcher. It starts with Lubavitcher and Hasidim are, that sect, but these guys it starts with an L. Anyway, so when they started, whacking the Jews, these guys said, hey, we're not like those guys. We are these guys. And basically the guys they sent all over the world looking for the Aryan came back and told Adolf, no, these guys aren't Jews. They are, they're our brethren. They're what we want to be. You want to be like these guys. You want to be ruthless? Be this. You want to rule the world? Be these guys, right? So they brought them into that, right? And these were the guys who were like Hail Hydra, and they became the Zionists. And they basically see all these things happened way before World War II. And World War II was just a continuation of World War One. With Versailles, it didn't end the war. It gave a truce, right, for 20 years. And it threw Germany into the garbage pit, right? The French, had all these reparations that just, Germany could never get a leg up. And that's what the French wanted. They wanted Germany to be a bitch of France forever. And that's what gave birth to Adolf. People go, how did Adolf Hitler, German people are smart, they're logical, they're not, they don't do this. And why? Because for 20 years, they were unbelievably treated cruelly, right? And if you watch the movie Cabaret, it's all about that because people were suffering so much. They went to the cabaret just to have some absinthe, just to have some drinks, just to watch girls run around in their underwear. And, then they'd go behind a curtain and have sex with them and gamble and just anything for escape from the just torment that they were feeling. And that's what gave rise to National Socialism. And behind it was a hidden hand, right? And it came in two hidden hand is way older, like really, millions of years old. Whereas the powers that shouldn't be are the Khazarian nation, 900 years old, right? And so they are the people like the Rothschilds. Everybody who seems to be in charge is just the powers that shouldn't be. They are the poster boys. Bill Gates, poster boy. You know, Mr. Facebook, poster boy. You know, Mr. Google, poster boy, and Mr. Facebook, Mr. Google, and a few other of the Silicon Valley kids um, all came from this singular high school that came out of the Council on Foreign Relations. They were breeding their next generation of, and that's what, if you were a what they call it in England, you're a you're a scholar, you're the name will come to my mind, but was one of these English leaders who started the Council of the Round Table, right? And he needed ancillaries around it to run the empire. And they, what do they call it? A fellow. Anyway, those guys, and that's what Bill Clinton was. He came from, his mom was a prostitute. He lived in a brothel. Why do you think the guy's so bent? Hillary's dad was, a beer truck driver. But and they said, well, we can play with their mind, so they'll do whatever the heck we want. And all they want is money. So that's what we'll give them, So they get a few million. So they get a couple $100 million. So they get $1 billion. That's chump change, right? And Bill and Hillary sold their soul for chump change, right? And they did. I mean, Bill did more to destroy the United States than anyone who any enemy we ever had. Bill Clinton did more. He basically got rid of whatever laws were making the banking system not be totally crooked. He got rid of, we don't need all these controls on the environment. Oh, we got to let our industry, and then what we need is globalization. We got to become Mr. Global, which is the tool of the hidden hand, a high table, and the powers that shouldn't be. And that's what we're seeing come to pass right in front of us, right now, this minute. And it's ooh-wee. So that's what's going on. That's what's happening. Let's see. Let's read some of your stuff. Cadres and the Debs happy. Yes. So, Sean Paul. I assisted an old gentleman today after he fell over. Oh, in the mud. Oh, my God. I could not get up. Good man, Eden. He must have been about 70 years old. But damn. I know. It's hard getting old. I mean, that's why I walk with a cane, It's not that I really need a cane, but it's my third leg, so I don't fall over. Whenever I lose my balance, it's there to make sure I don't fall over. And I'm very sure, I am very sure where I put every foot, right? Because my legs, I have this stuff called neuropathy. I have this other stuff called Charcot legs. So it's like a real serious case of arthritis, but worse because it kind of dissolves your bones. And being the Aquarian I am and the injuries I had as a young man, my ankles are really, I spent half my life on ladders. So I was like doing this with my ankles and keeping my balance. And so I really had to be because I could snap my foot off my leg. So I have all these things, but people look at me and I get around really well. And, I'm not, but you're not sick, The one good thing about being as sick as I am, it makes me really appreciate being well, right? And in my age and all the things that are wrong with me, well is not good or bad. It's a gradating scale. And, it makes me appreciate things way more than if I was like when I was 27, I took everything for granted. Between the age of of 22 and 27, that's when my nickname, the Dude. I was like in the movie, The Big Lebowski, but even more because I was like building nightclubs. I could go into any nightclub in New York City because I was the nightclub electrician. And I may not have built every one of them, but I had something to do with making them happen electrically. And one little job that I had that paid really well and was fun, and is that most of the big discos, Xenons, Studio 54 Regimes, Danceteria, Mud Club, Tunnel Club, um, about 20 others, they could be shut down like that by the fire inspector. And he could walk in and no one could stop him. And if he saw one exit light not working, you're closed tonight. And that would be like 20 grand for these people. So they give them $1,000 cash, And that's really what, if you had the job as a fire inspector or health inspector, that was like, your salary was like $40,000, but you had that big house in the Hamptons. Where'd that come from? You're driving around in a Jaguar. Where'd that come from? So, and you were working for the mob. So most of these places were run by that. But all of these, and a number of like, Tony Two Toes and Bobby Bentnos, who own most of these places, basically had me go in every night and look at all the things that would capture. I mean, they'd rather not have to spend $1,000, or more. But so they would pay me $300 or $400 a week to go into each of their clubs and make sure that exit light was working. And I'd have in each one of their clubs, I'd have a ladder, and I'd have a little box of my tools. That would be the only tools I needed to fix whatever went wrong in their place, right? So, and I'd have whatever lamps I needed or whatever this I needed. I had a closet, Al's closet, electrician's closet, electrical closet, right? And I didn't have to carry anything. I'd go in there, walk around, and see what didn't work, what worked, what would catch the inspector's eye, and fix it right then and there, right? And I get you get $300 or $400 from each club, and you're doing it for 20, 30 clubs. You don't have to do much work other than that. And that's why I was the Big Lebowski, because that was my main gig. But I had all these other gigs where they were really interesting and they paid me ridiculous amounts of money. Those were my two little things. And they weren't just doing electric work. I had other little offshoots, right? My healing work and my social science work and my political advising work. I got paid really well, ridiculous amounts, and access to things I wanted to get access to. And it gave me the ability to, so then I got helpers to go and do those jobs, and not so much the electrical jobs. And so when I wanted to take a trip, I could take a trip for 5-6 months. I could go live in England, mostly London, or I could go live in Ireland, mostly Dublin, but the West Coast. I was all over the West Coast of Ireland. I could go to Spain, I could go to Morocco. I could go to Portugal, right? Lisbon. These are towns I liked. And I liked the littler towns too, but I've actually forgotten most of their names. I would just, hitchhike around, sleep out under the trees. I did a lot of that in Greece. I really loved the mountains near Delphi. I spent a lot of time around Delphi because I was really affected by the spirits there. And so let's see, read some more of this. I just, right, okay. Yeah, St. Patrick's Day today has been feeling super spiritually charged. Yep. Actually, while I was walking my dogs, I went walking along the ferry pass. Yep. In the countryside. Yep. Zionists. Yes, thank you. Yep, Zionists. Jews carry the seed of Cain. Yep, Zionists. Not Jews. I mean, Jews do, but not the Hebrew nation. Big difference, right? Because the Hebrew nation are tribes, and they're all different. They don't carry the same seed. Thomas More's books, Utopia, are the people defected and golden, pots, and were criminals and no goods or gold jewelry. Yep, drank out of lead cups. Yep, so it's the same as it ever was, and that's why I keep talking about we need to start focusing on alternative aesthetic, a whole different way, an old, new way of looking at our life, right? And it has to be in service to something higher than materialism. More than you don't want to be another Jeff Bezos. Does that guy look happy? But he's willing to sacrifice thousands of people's lives to make another $1 billion. And look what he spends his money on. Same with the guy who was Bill Gates's partner when they started. What's his name? He made a lot of money. He was a billionaire. And I was living, down on the east coast of Florida, because my parents lived in a place kind of not central, but not on the coast, in ways, but near Stewart, but about 30 miles to Stewart. And Stewart's a very old town with a lot of old wealth. So a lot of culture there, right? A lot of interesting things. And Palm Beach and West Palm Beach became, the nouveau riche, right, from Stewart. But Stewart still has, why I was interested in Stewart is that they have a tremendous amount of political pull there. And a friend of mine was a lawyer, and his wife was a political lawyer, and he was corporate lawyer, right? And she, did things for people who had no money needed to be taken care of, like immigrants and Black people and, poor people. And she would not only represent those folks, but she would represent the way she would get them, justice was she wouldn't just go after getting them off, but she would go into the political structure and barbecue the people who made these laws that were tormenting the poor and make them change the laws. So they were a dynamic duo, and they were loads of fun. And I met them actually in the Keys a few years before, because after they graduated from their prestigious law schools, they worked for corporations, I think in Boston, and they got tired of that, but they made some money, and they both liked to sail, and they bought themselves a nice sailboat, and they sailed around the Caribbean for 3 or 4 years. And they had a place down in the Keys that had, a place to die. Basically, it was a place that I had my little condo, my little cabin on the beach. And this place, really interesting place, had a big hotel made in the 50s and 60s, very, George Jetson meets the Flintstones. I mean, really nice apartments, and, beautiful pool, tiki bar, Cubano restaurant that was kicking, and a marina with a really great boatyard. And so it had everything you ever needed hardware-wise, right? And it had slips. So these people were like me. They had one of the little cabanas, and they had a slip for their sailboat. So when they got tired or wanted to come back to America and do something, they had a place they could park a car, keep it there all year long, and they could pull their boat in and get in the car, drive around. But this place was so much fun, right? And when the period of time when what do they call it? The time when all the tourists showed up, mostly the Canadians, they had all these really beautiful suites that you didn't have to live in your little cabana, which ours was nice, but the suite was really nice because it was four-story thing, so you could get a suite on the fourth story and see the ocean forever. And it had, it was kind of a kidney-shaped building, so it had all these curved surfaces. So every one of the apartment suites, they're more like apartments because they had this veranda, which the glass doors opened up, boom, 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 and went into the wall. So half of your living space was in the outside, right? And had one or two bedrooms. And they had a real kitchen. I mean, with a real refrigerator, real stove that you could bake and cook, and a real sink and a real dishwasher, right? And they had a lot of storage. And so there were times when we would cruise, like Christmassy time, when the Canadians were there, for a very small, like $40 a night, whatever it cost them to clean it and take care of it. Much rather get that $40 because they're going to have to pay for it anyway every night because it was kind of like the ancillary cost. Whether somebody was in it or not, they had to kind of come up with that. So they were happy, because I was paying for the other thing. And so we would go up there, we'd get the suites that would connect, and we would just party down and have a great time. And they knew everybody who was doing everything on the nose and on the arm. And so we had great parties, And that swimming pool they had was gigantic, and it was many different shapes. I mean, it wasn't just a big rectangle. It was like, it had like little areas you could go and screw. I mean, they had little benches in the swimming pool that had jets, so it was like being in a jacuzzi. And they made sure there was no light in that corner, so you could fool around all you wanted. And the tiki bar was right over there, so you could, find some, barfly who looked pretty good after a few beers and take her into the pool and say, "Oh, I got no bathing suit." "Oh, you take them off. You can skinny dip in this pool. It's legal." And, pretty much after sunset, you could because no one saw anything. It was, they had very low lighting and a couple of lights in the pool, like where the steps were. But, in these corners, no, not so much. So, I mean, we had parties that were like, still talked about, right? And so, and we knew the owners. We had our little cabins. I'd fix things for them that the Joe handyman couldn't fix. And I would, I still was doing. I had my my massage table in those days. Still, I don't know where that is now. And I would give the owners. They'd come to my cabin. I'd work on them, and they would send their rich friends, and I'd work on them. And how much oil? I said, "There's a little basket by the door." And those guys would leave $300, $400, $500 because when they left that room, they felt better than, like they were like in heaven. Because I do this. I call it. What do I call it? I had a name for it. Deep psychic loving. That's what it is. DPL, right? And basically, I do cranial sacral. I do acupressure. I do shiatsu, and I do a thing called swaddling. And I usually have two jacuzzis, a hot jacuzzi and a cold jacuzzi. And I put you, and so I get you go from one to the other. And then I have a bed I put you in, and you're swaddled. And when you're swaddled, you go to sleep like that. You're like the perfect temperature. Everything is perfect. And you just knock out. And after I've released every tension in your body and got everything flowing and got you into homeostasis, I would put you there and put a few essential oils around you, and bing, it would go off. And, I would give you a few suggestions on what to dream about, and I'd leave you there. And then about whenever they would wake up, usually 20, 30 minutes later, they'd wake up and the clothes were there. I had one of those things where it was like a chair and you'd hang your stuff and it would take all the wrinkles out. I had a little steamer. And so their clothes were warm, dry, not a wrinkle, all neatly folded and ready for them to put on and walk out that door feeling like $1 million. And these people were really rich. because they were friends of the owners of the people, and those people were really rich. And so they, but what's the thing about rich people? They're not as rich as they think they are, because in '08, it devastated Florida. It devastated all these people who thought they were rich. And like the guys who owned that place, I had to sell it. I couldn't make it. They were doing really well, making millions of dollars every year up until '08, when nobody showed up, and their bills, and all their investments died, and what we are on the going through right now with the market, dropping, 2 and 3,000 points a day, and then coming up, 500 points. Oh, look, it's coming back up. No, they just do that to give the morons, to stay in. Anyway, so the market is we are basically. It depends on what what, as Shakespeare says, what's in the stars, So we could be on the edge of one of these, falls of an empire. Right? And we haven't had a fall of the empire since the fall of the Roman Empire. Well, English Empire, not so much. It was just a little comic book thing, because, the bank, the city of London, there's, the Vatican City, there's the City of London, and District of Columbia. Those are the three entities that run the planet. The Vatican owns your soul. They're the people who hold all the birth certificates. The City of London owns all the money, right? They're the guys who, through trusts, hide everyone's nickels, right? Not sheltered bank accounts. You can't do that anymore. But trusts, you can put zillions of dollars in trusts, and that's, thank you, Mr. Rothschild. Thank you, Khazarian Nation. So and then you have D.C., and D.C. is the land of war. It's all about war, all about killing people, all about power through violence. And that's the three pillars of the hidden hand, of the high table, of the powers that shouldn't be. Again, the powers that shouldn't be are just the poster boys. So when England lost its imperial throne, when they went into Egypt in the 50s, that's why we have this Anglo-American thing. They basically took all their gold, all their liquidity, and put it into trusts in the City of London, and all of the imperial power of their navy, et cetera, went to America, which we go to their rescue every war that we're in. We are protecting their interests, right? The wars in the Middle East, we're protecting English interest of BP, right? Oh, grandma's beeping. So let's see what you're saying here. Yeah, St. Patrick's Day. And you know who St. Patrick was? He was a guy like me, anthropologist, scholar, a know-it-all. And the Romans kept sending legions to Ireland to conquer them, and they couldn't. And the legions never came back. It wasn't like they were defeated, got on the boats, and went home. Nobody came back. They didn't even send heads of the generals in baskets back. That's what the Persians used to do. And that's because Ireland had an alternative aesthetic. They had the bards, right? And they had the druids, right? And they had the women of the woods. And these people were beyond the mystic schools, They were beyond, being an alchemist. These folks were pretty amazing, because they inspired in the people of a knowledge of being awake, of being connected, of being ascended, right? And that's hard to beat. So St. Patrick told the empire, listen, I'll go take care of this. And they said, so you want a legion to go with you? He goes, no, I'm going by myself. I work much better alone, right? So he went over there. He spent many years studying them and realized that he could do a lot of their magic, so he could kind of pretend to kind of be like them. And then he kind of got closer and closer, never quite got into the inner circle, but they were saying, well, this guy's not so bad. Maybe, we'll learn something from him, where he was trying to learn everything. So the snakes he drove out of Ireland with the Druids and, the bards and the women of the woods. But he didn't really drive them out of Ireland. What he drove them to was into the hedgerows, right? So he knocked their political power down, because what he did was made the people of Ireland lose their faith and trust in this alternative aesthetic. And they were like, more, oh, look, this guy's got, gold, and he can do this, and oh, I'll do that, and we'll be part of the empire. And so they, because the bards and the druids and the women, they were, not a large number. And if they didn't have the backing of the people, well, they couldn't keep the Romans out. So the Romans came in, took over. Romans are the English. Yeah, that's who the English are. Because, the House of Tudor, those guys are from Germany. They're not from England. So that's where we are. If we can look at our past with honesty, we can learn a lot. We can really save our butts, and that is going to have to be one of the key factors of this alternative aesthetic. And so studying what the bards and the druids and the women of the woods did, we have to start looking at their culture, and that's why I started the Hedgerow Longhouse, where I married that culture of the bards, the druids, and the women of the woods with the indigenous folk, right? The Longhouse. The Iroquois Nation had this thing called the Longhouse, where that's, before, and this is how the Iroquois Nation came around. They were a serious warring crew, because it was the Mohawk, the Onondaga, the Iroquois, Seneca, and a few others. And all they did was kill each other, right? Now, they didn't kill each other like go attack the tribal land with the women and children and the fields. No, just the warriors came around and went after it. But it was still a cost of the tribal life, right? So one day, they're near, I think, Seneca Lake. And this is like little peninsula, and they're like decide to have their war on this peninsula, because that way they can't run away. And so here they are going after each other, and the weapon of choice of those guys was a thing called the hatchet, right? And it had a pike on one end, it had a really sharp blade on the other, had a big club on this end, and it was of a length that you could throw it, and you could really either stick that pike in someone's head, or the hatchet would zip them, right? And so you could do some serious damage with this thing, especially if you were well trained in the use of it. And they had their bows and arrows. And so, this was like carnage as much as you can get with weapons like that. And so they're at it. And one day, they're at it, and somebody goes, hey, look at that. And they all kind of look over there. And there's a guy in a white robe walking across the lake. He's walking on the water, walking do. And he walks over, and he opens up the middle of the peninsula and says, I want you all to bury the hatchet. So they all threw their hatchets in, closed it. He went over to, and he, said, let's build this house for us all. And, they took down trees and twigs and limbs, and they made this long house, right? And they all fit in, and they kind of sweated in there, right? Because all these guys sweated. So they're sweating. So they're having visions. And this is Jesus Christ who came over there. And around, 6th century, 600, maybe 400, while the Europeans were still running around in rags, when they're in the Dark Ages, Jesus shows up with these guys and says, listen, you need to live in peace. And he gave them rules to go by in the longhouse. The longhouse is where everyone comes and has the freedom to speak, from the highest to lowest, from the chief to right. And how it works is there's a person who's a facilitator, a chief, but not a chief, but a facilitator, right? And then there is a scribe who takes it down, or a griot remembers the story. And then there is the gatekeeper, vibes watcher. So if things get out of hand, they go, hey, you can't handle it, get out, And then there's the gatekeeper who doesn't let you in unless you're down with what was said the last time, and that you agreed with that, and because it was all about consensus, and that you were agreeing with the agenda that was to be discussed in Longhouse, because you agreed to that at the end of the meeting. And this thing can go on forever, and everyone learns patience, and there's a talking stick or feather, and it goes around counterclockwise, and you can't speak forever, but you get to speak your piece, right? 10, 15, 20 minutes, right? And if you're really eloquent, maybe longer, right? It's basically how long you can keep everyone's attention, right? So, and everyone in the longhouse is supposed to be attentive, right? So the new aesthetic has to be based on the hedgerow longhouse, whereas this place that keeps, and the reason why the hedgerow was a place, Ireland has a lot of stones, and so they want to farm this land. They had to pick all the stones out of the, and they have a lot of brambles, so they had to clear that land and push all the stones and brambles to the edge of where they're going to grow stuff. And so as that grew up, it would grow up bigger, and would be 20, 40, 50 feet wide, and 10, 15, 20 feet high. Brambles, and brambles are like sticker bushes and witch hazel and rose bush and everything with thorns. Really hard to get through, right? And there's boulders and big rocks, and so you got to go, and things are growing out of it. So it's pretty impenetrable. So if you have a longhouse that's surrounded by a hedgerow, it cannot be attacked, it cannot be harmed, it cannot be going after. And that's where Brer Rabbit, the story of Brer Rabbit, came from, the hedgerow. And so what we need is an impenetrable aesthetic, right, that gives everyone the opportunity to say their piece, and that everyone who speaks their piece has the respect of the listener and their own respect to speak in a way that doesn't represent a prejudice, meaning my opinion is this. No. Your feeling, your faith, what's coming out of here is where you got to talk from. And every politician you see, they had, 20 people on the Democratic dais. Now it's down to the two, oldest guys who are basically senile. Bernie just repeats the same thing over and over again without really thinking about what it is. And that's why, if he was thinking, he wouldn't call himself a socialist that, caucuses with the Democrat. No, forget it, because back in the day, and he's thinking back in the day, when America worked between the 1880s and 1970s, yes, between that time, the workers, because they were working in factories and making, the capitalists richer than rich, and then they were having monopolies and taking over, owning everything. The only way they could organize as unions, right? So during that period, 1870s to 1970, that 100-year period, only time America kind of worked, because instead of having two-party system, which is just two wings of the same Luciferian corporate bird, we had, you know, the Labor Party, the Workers' Party, the Socialist, and the Communist Party. We also had the Religious Party, then we had the Democrats and Republicans. And so there were 7 parties that would win enough of the Congress that they would have to work together, make a consensus. We don't do that now because every politician is owned by big business. We have the best legislators money can buy. And that is the aesthetic we're running on. And that's why we have this plague. That's why the stock market is going through the floor. That's why we're having like 9 wars, real wars, not just skirmishes, but real wars. Iraq, Lebanon, Syria. The first one, up in the mountains where the Taliban is. And then we have the bombing of the Yemen. We have Niger. We have what's going on in, the central democracy of Congo. And we have about 4 or 5 others that are killing hundreds to thousands of people a month, right? Then we have places like India that's open, go after whoever you want to kill, right? As long as you praise Modi, right? And, Turkey's that way, China's that way. China not so much, but Turkey, it's Brazil, any place that they've replaced democracy or seeming democracy with a heavy-handed authoritarian, right? The guy in the Philippines, he's killed, 20, 30,000 people without, just going off and kill people, right? Oh, they were a bad guy. Let's kill them, And so, that is that aesthetic, the aesthetic of the, buy your way, force your way, own your way, The Holy Roman Empire, which is now the Vatican City, owns your soul, owns your, birth certificate, Bank of, City of London owns all the money, buys everything. District of Columbia. And when they passed that rule, District of Columbia, it was called, HRS 1871, because that's when the thing was passed. Not only did that, it gave corporations the freedom and rights of individual people unto the Constitution, where it says, we the people. Well, they took a Sharpie and took that out and put we the corporations. If you drive around America, you go through any little town, any city, any county, it'll say incorporated village, incorporated city, incorporated, and that means it's a corporation. Like when the '08 crash and I was in Florida happened, my parents lived in a really swanky, gated community / country club / only rich white people. They had no blacks, period. And the workers, they were treated like slaves. You weren't supposed to tip the people in the hotel, in the dining rooms. I always put a $10 bill underneath my plate for the server. And they would go. And it was like a secret. So my parents lived there 20 years. So everyone who worked that place, and when everyone hated my father, he could be a real jerk. And so no one would come and fix anything. The security people would never come and fix anything. But if I called them up, they would come, right? And because certain things I couldn't fix, because it meant that it had to deal with the larger system of this gated community. But anyway, so everybody walked around like, they were, kings and queens. And so for that, you gave every month there. And when my father first moved there, he's one of the first people, he bought like a crappy house. And they had like 20, 30 crappy houses, about 300 sites where people were going to build their gigantic rich people place, right? So he kind of fixed that up. He bought it for nothing. I mean, he bought his way into that place for about $70,000. And when he was the first, staying there, his fee every month, he paid like $2,000 um, um, a year for staying there, right? And for that 2,000, they took care of the golf course. They took care of his, they mowed his lawn. They, took care of all the shrubbery. They took care of everything because everything kind of had to look a certain way. So they took and painted the house, took care of all the services, fixed everything until my dad was such a jerk that nobody wanted to. They would cut the grass because everyone else would see that, but they wouldn't fix the water heater or everything got fixed, and it's a pretty good deal. Plus, you got $200 of food there, right? And when you started out, it was less but by the time I left, it was $200 a month of eating there, right? And they had amazing chefs, amazing food. And that's really where I packed on the pounds. And they had 5 swimming pools. Everyone else had, the rich people had their own swimming pool. That was like, had a screen around it so the bugs wouldn't get you. But if you went and swam in that pool between 10 a.m. and, sundown, the bugs wouldn't get you. Around, when the sun was down, wasn't hot down. And they had enough palm trees that you could stay in that swimming pool. And as the sun moved, you could swim over to be shaded by a palm tree. It was great. The last 4 years I took care of my parents. I had to be there pretty much a good deal of the time. I still did my desperate lawyer gig, but those were only a couple weeks of and I'd come back. And when my parents were real jerks, what I would do is, I had a lot of friends in the Stewart and Port St. Lucie and not Jackson. There was this really cute little town right on the beach, Jensen Beach. That was the unbelievable tourist town. And I had friends who lived there because you could live right on the frigging beach. And you could, they had houses that weren't motels, but you could rent them in those days. I don't know what they rent for now, but, $500-600, maybe less, maybe more. Some were really dumps and they weren't right on the beach. They were like in alleys. I had a friend, he had a really great little hovel for like, $200, but it was right, just, walk, and you walked out of this little alley and there were all these bars, and he liked it because he was a drunk and he could stumble home and it was the only alley and he'd walk, straight into the door that he had to go into. He never locked the door. He never had anything to steal, and no one would steal in that town anyway. But anyway, so I was having a pretty good time. When my parents were fun, they were fun. When they weren't, I was visiting him. I had a couple of girlfriends. I had other friends in Stewart, and then I had my place down in the Keys, right, which I would go to at least 1 week a month, just to say, hey, I need to, get away from you. And they wouldn't mind. Yeah, as long as they could get around. When they started, couldn't get around, before I got a really good staff for them. But anyway, and after they died, so before they died, my father had a house in North Carolina, and he had this house in Florida. And in 2006, someone offered him, now he bought this thing for like 30 grand, really didn't do anything to it. But a guy wanted to buy because he had the most beautiful lot. It was right in the corner, and there was a lake there, and the swimming pool was right over the tennis. It was really, and it was a big lot because it was on this corner. So it kind of went from that next house. Most of these houses, which were the crappy houses, they were kind of, that far from each other. His house, the lot went from that property all the way around. So they moved his house. So he wasn't like this. He was, 20, 30 yards So he had a really nice lot. Guy offered him $3 million to sell that house, right? '06. And his house in North Carolina, again, was in another one of these gated golf communities, really beautiful in Waynesville. And he built that house, because I built him a number of houses. And after the last one, I had it. After my last business dealings with him, I had it. And so I wanted them to, so I built all these beautiful houses that, I built, labor, land, materials under $100,000. And they were all two or 3,000 square foot houses, really amazing houses. And on beautiful lots, they were farms. They were really, I had a really great business plan. But my dad, got tired of making money and that he couldn't control. He was getting it, but he didn't understand what I was doing. So he just stopped the business because he could. Because if he couldn't be the king, and I wasn't a king, I was just, the golden goose, right? Anyway, so after that, I said, forget that. So he calls me up and invites me, I want to show you this property. It was up on a hill, it was beautiful, it was gorgeous. And my mom, as she always did, starts drawing things on napkins of, she doesn't even do it on graph paper. And I said, oh, that's nice. And he goes, yeah, I want you to build it like the other ones. I said, forget it, Dad. No, not going to do it. What? I said, no, sorry. I don't even live here. Don't do anything here. I just came to visit. Yeah, have a good day. Good luck with that. What? So he had to get an architect. Architect cost him $160,000 because it was right on the edge of a cliff, beautiful place. But the foundation itself cost $70,000 to be engineered so it wouldn't tumble down the hill, right? And then the house I wanted cost another, $100 and something thousand just for the house. And so, so he got to realize, because all the other houses I built him, we were in this place in Long Island where I lived there long enough and was involved in a lot of stuff. And the head building inspector had my name. We both had the same name. And he thought that was cool. And he knew he had come from New York and he had been in the unions and he knew the people I knew in the unions. And so and then after he saw the first building I built, he said, you do it the right way. I can trust you to do it. I'll come and inspect it, to be righteous, but I won't bust your balls over anything. So, that was pretty cool. I built a lot of stuff out there and mostly was rehab, which was even more difficult than building things from scratch. And he liked the way I did stuff. So, so the three houses I built my parents were really, one was from scratch. The other two was I kind of took them apart and, one house was before the revolution. One was before the Civil War. They didn't have foundations. They were just built on stone. I jacked them up and put a real foundation underneath them so I could then run real plumbing lines and electric lines and stuff like that. And, did other things to them. But, so I said no. So all those other houses, my mom did it on, right? So this inspector guy, he had a son who was an engineer. And so I would have him do an engineering drawing, which was good enough to he would put his architect, he was an architect, his engineering architect stamp on it. And it would have, just like you did in shop, the down view, the different side views. And that was good enough to get in. Say, okay, that's what it's going to be. Okay. So when I built these things, I had some really good artisans. This was in '86 when, the savings and loan crash happened, which was one of America's worst economic collapses. We went from having something on the order of 40,000 banks to having 20 major banks. So, and that's why it was done. So everybody lost their house. It was worse. More people lost their house than in '08. And it was, thank you, Bill Clinton didn't fix anything. He took whatever few circuit breakers they had, he took them out and made it even crazier, the banking economic system. And so there were all these guys who were great carpenters and plumbers and, cabinet makers and masons who had become junkies and lost everything, lost their houses, lost their families, were just living homeless basically. And I met this one, I was working on this one house and I was doing everything myself, right? And I'm not a roofer, I'm an okay everything. I can do plumbing. I'm an amazing electrician, but and I've worked around enough sites to know how to do all these things. But I don't like if I don't like doing it, I'm not, So I had this one building. I was a gigantic, auto body shop, right? And it had a fire, and so they put a new roof on it, right? So the roof was in good shape, and they had done some structural stuff to it, so it opened the downstairs in a larger way because the fire kind of made it wobbly, and they put in steel. Right. Anyway, so it looked terrible because it had been burnt and it still looked barbecued, but they put a new roof on it and they done structural stuff. So it was in pretty good shape. And it was a pretty big building. And the roof, the upstairs, had, when you took they put this stupid, crappy, cheapo sheetrock ceiling, and it was falling down. They did such a bad job. But if you took that down, because of the structural stuff they had done, you could have big atrium space, like from the bridge to the floor, maybe 30 feet, right? So I said, you know what? I'm going to turn downstairs into real high level office, and upstairs, 2 really nice apartments. I'll live in one and rent the other out, right? So I did. And so I had taken all the crappy windows out, and the good thing about my father and I made a good partnership in that he had the money, I had everything else: experience, knowledge, vision. That one other thing he had was he was a good buyer. He got the cheap, the best thing at the cheapest price, right? And I was too busy doing all this to do that. So he actually he got some great windows. He got great flooring. He got great materials at the cheapest price, and that's why we did pretty good on these things. So we actually made a pretty good team. But he had no idea how this stuff went together, And he would come in. So why aren't you doing that? I want you to do that. And I said, no, Dad, you don't do that first. You got to do this, this, and this before you do that. And so I want you to do that. I said, well, it don't work that way. Sorry, So anyway, we did this first thing, and it was and I picked that building. My brother showed me a bunch of buildings because he lived in this town, and I picked the crappiest one, the cheapest one, and one that was seemingly in a bad neighborhood, but it was right on the main drag of the whole town, and the economy was getting better, and the only place it could move was into the gentrifying, right? And this was right on the edge, meaning right next door, just across the street was this big fancy place that sold, mink coats and diamonds, And we were like across the street, and that's where and everything behind was, the Great South Bay. So the ocean was there. So they were going to be building really fancy houses on the ocean. Right? So I said, that's our first building. So I got that. So I'm up on the roof and I'm cutting holes because I'm putting skylights and everything. So it'll be super bright. We're going to have a big atrium, skylights, right? And I'm putting in all new windows. And I have all these windows leaned against the building. And I'm just cutting the first hole to put the first skylight in. And this guy comes in the building because it's totally open. I've taken all the doors, everything. There's nothing really to steal. And there's nobody there to steal anything, really. Even the cause they said, oh, this is a terrible crime. No, please. I lived in Williamsburg, Brooklyn in the 70s, where they'd shoot you if they didn't know you. So anyway, this guy comes in. He walks up the steps. He comes up and he's like, looking at me, putting me in that thing, and goes, that's not how you do that. And I go, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not how you do it because I've never done this before.
He goes, well, I've done about 1,000 of these. And he goes, you got a brand new roof. You don't want to fuck that up. And I said, so what are you? Carpenter? He says, I'm a master carpenter. And I said, oh, you're a master carpenter. So I said, okay, let me come down. So I come down and I walk him through the whole building what I want to do. And I have him tell me exactly how he would do it. And I said, okay, not bad. So how much you want an hour? And he goes, I'll take $7 an hour. I said, no. I'm going to pay you 12. He goes, what? I goes, you need it, don't you? Yeah. And I said, the only thing I want you to do is stop smoking cigarettes, stop drinking alcohol, and stop doing drugs. If you can do those 3 things, I'll pay you $12 an hour. He did, like that. He had that kind of willpower. And he hadn't gotten divorced, and he still had his kids, and he still barely had his house because he had made a lot of money. And he was just getting up the edge of, where he was, So he stopped all 3. He did an amazing job on everything. And I got other people. He knew all these other guys who were in the same position. So we built a crew, There was a guy who did cabinets, really, and built them right there. He brought in his table saw and his joiner, and he built amazing stuff right there and there, which is a lot easier, right? And so it fit and it looked beautiful. And there was another guy was a mason, and we had some cement work to do. Had another guy he was a black guy, and he had really sharp on the ball, and had been working in excavating and all of that. And he was always the dude. He always got paid pretty well, but he didn't have his own business. And what he did, he saved all his money. And when the crash of 86 happened, and all these businesses went out of business, he bought equipment, not brand new stuff, but the stuff that was like, how much you want for that crane? That thing, we never use that thing. How about $1,000? Sure, because great. He got in. He was a mechanic. Oh, it still works. Okay. And he had a crane that he could take dirt out and move things in, and it was really better than any other piece of equipment I ever saw. And it was small. It wasn't gigantic, and it was on tractor treads. And it came with the trailer and the truck to pull it, and which he then used to pull other. He got a cat and a D7 and a backhoe, right? And so backhoe could dig trenches and move stuff around. The excavator could, once you got a thing, once a hole was dug out by the crane, he would leave a thing that he could bring in this other machine that could sculpt everything to exactly what you wanted. And he did concrete. He bought all these forms, and he brought a couple of his black friends who were, again, really masters at doing concrete forms, but didn't have the business, right? So he brought them in until he, you don't need a mixer. He had one, but, he would get it from the yard. So this guy dug the hole, laid the foundation. It was 3,000 square foot. And this was on a site that had been a farm. And it had been a farm before the Civil War. And it had a lot of barns. And the guy couldn't farm anymore. And so we saw, and this is what got my dad really pissed, because I bought the whole friggin' farm, 100 acres, for $150,000, like $1,500 an acre. And it was the Great South Bay was on one whole side, and then a little rivulet was here, and just on the other side was East Hampton. We were like a stone throw from East Hampton. This was a farm, and there was a road that came from East Hampton and went right along and went into a place called Remsenburg. And I bought that, and I bought another chunk of that same kind of property in the Mauritius, East Mauritius, right, for about $80,000, because I could sign the checks. So I spent a little less, a little more than $200,000 and bought these 2 pieces of property.
And this one farm had so many buildings on it. What I was going to do was I was either going to pick the buildings up and move them onto a real foundation and then build a new house on the inside, or I was going to take it apart and mill the wood and then build a brand new building, but make it look like it was made before the right. So that was the first house we built like that. I built for my dad, and we built that for 60 grand. Right. He sold it during the next Great Depression in the 90s for $400,000, right? And and that's after I did that, and he just stewed in his juices because I was then I was getting equipment to move houses. I was doing all this like mammoth stuff without telling him about it, and so one day I got a call from a lawyer, and he says, you got to come to the office. Your dad wants to see us. So I was there. So my father's two best friends, who weren't in the Air Force, his two best business friends was his accountant, his lawyer, and so go in there. And my dad goes, "Okay, I'm going to this other lawyer, and I am dissolving the business, but I want to do it in your office because you wrote the contract that we had." And that guy says, "You have to, put your stamp of approval on this for the state to okay this." And, the accountant, and by this time, we have fixed up a number of other buildings, and we have a rent roll of $42,000 a month, right? So in 1 year, we made up for whatever money I spent on all that property. And the lawyer goes, "No, you can't do that." I mean, and he's looking at this thing. He goes, "But you're not giving Al anything, and who are you going to sell this to? And how much?" And my father, "I'm going to sell it for whatever I got into it, and that's $300,000." And that was like almost 200 acres on $20 million worth property, right? And we have a number of houses that were in one state or another of completion. And my father, all the stuff we did, he gave my sister a house, and he gave other people property that this company owned to them without any asking me anything. And so anyway, so he disbanded the business. And so for about 6 years, I had nothing to do, had nothing to do with my family. And then I guess it was in the 90s. What happened is I got a gig in Asheville, and they were in Waynesville. And so that's, my father called me. He didn't even know, he wasn't, interested in me enough to know what I was doing. So he got a hold of me and said, "Hey, I want you to come visit us." And I said, "Oh, where are you?" Waynesville. I didn't say, "Oh, I'm in Asheville." I just said, "Well, I'm working." He says, "Well, I said, you're going to put me up someplace, you're going to pay the bills, you're going to, I said, "What?" He goes, "What are you telling me? I'm your dad." I said, "No, Dad, you want me to do something. You wouldn't be calling me unless you wanted me to do something. Want me to do something? Pay me something. That's the only thing you understand." He says, "Okay, I'll put you in a motel." That's okay. "You going to pay for the gas? You going to pay for I'll take you out to dinner." "Yeah, I'll give you $200 for gas." I said, "Where are you?" I said, "Not too far." So I drove there and saw his lot and realized what it was going to cost. And I wasn't going to do it the same way I did it for him. A, I didn't have my crew. And B, I wanted my father to finally realize what we did there. Right? So I said, "Yeah, well, I'm not here, Dad. See you later. Bye." I hung out with my mom, enjoyed that, and so he said, "Can you stick around? There's this architect I want to talk to about this. And I want you because you're knowledgeable about this." And I go, "Well, that's what you call a contractor, you know. You're going to pay me a contractor's fee." I said, "Well, go find yourself a contractor, and I will just be a consultant."
you can pay me $5. I said, okay. So he asks a few people around. He finds, oh yeah, this guy. So, first we go to the architect, and this guy he's really good. I look at, his portfolio. I see the buildings he's built. Of course, most of them are around that area. So we drive around and take a look at them. And he calls a few of them and says, can these people come in? And I snoop around. I look at the basement and how things are built and how we did this and how we did that and the specialties about it and all the above. I said, okay. I said, this is your guy, because we looked at a couple of architects and they wouldn't build a house that was appropriate for this site. This guy would. And this guy was ready to cut his cost by 20% because he really wanted to make a showcase house because, again, my dad moved in and bought this lot when it was still cheap. And, there were 120 lots and there were only 3 houses. And one house was a really rich guy who started the whole thing in a gigantic mansion at the top. And there was another one on the other side of the hill. And this house would be the house my dad would have, would be the one that from the highway you would see, from the town you would see, on the road coming up to this place you would see. So when the guy saw the lot and where it was and who would see it and how it would be seen, he said, I'm going to knock 20, because the guy said, this my architectural fee, 160 grand. And my father, what? I built a house in Long Island. He didn't build a freaking house in Long Island. I built a house in Long Island. I built a house, 60 grand. It's twice as big as it's in Long Island. And I looked at the architect. I said, yep, I did that. And then the architect and I talked about all that stuff because my mom just drew things on a napkin, right? So I sat down with him for a couple of when he had spare time and, did an architectural drawing, the first one. And then we got the contractor involved and he talked about, because he was an engineer too. So, and this foundation was like building the pyramids. So, so the 3 of us came to understanding, and then we had a meeting with my mom and my dad, and so that thing cost 300 grand, right? But when he was offered in 2006, he was offered $12 million for that house. And I was getting out of everything. I was selling everything, my stocks, my properties, my everything. And getting liquid to the best way I could. I still kept the thing. See, I did the biggest mistake in real estate. I kept the properties that I really loved. I kept my little cabana in the Keys. I kept the school, and I kept my other property in the deep green, right? And so I basically, they built that house, and cost of that. So I kept telling my dad, because I was at this time taking. My parents died in 2008, so I'm about 2002 to 2008. I kept more of a, I'd see my parents maybe once a month, maybe less. But once they started to go downhill, and people don't just die like that. It took them a good 6 years to die. And that's when I, stayed, especially in the winter, I'd spend, from Christmas to March there. And then they would move up to North Carolina, and I was close to them because I had a place in North Carolina. And so I had a really nice place in North Carolina near a place called Micaville, which is super duper, the king's crown of the energetic fields of the ley lines. It's really amazing place. There's a book called The Celestine Prophecy, right? And that book is about Micaville, the place where, the guy was drawn to and the corporation was doing weird science, da-da-da-da. That was that place.
There were more underground dumbs there than you could shake a lift at. But where I was, it had its own. It was like as close to the old Crohn's farm. It was a little, you know, Blue Ridge Mountain farm that was probably built, I don't know, somewhere between the 1870s and the 1920s. And it was one of those buildings where they had the log cabin with the breezeway and then added on things, right, as the family got bigger. And they had 2 or 3 really nice barns. And that's really what I did. I kind of, there was one really nice barn that was clean and not messed up and had a good roof. It had a great hayloft. And I built an apartment in that barn. I built walls on the inside, insulated, sprayed the insulation on, and put gutters on the thing, and poured a concrete floor and put in septic and underground wires. And that was the first thing I did. And then I took my time in redoing the old farmhouse. And I basically met this guy who was a doctor, and he came from the neighborhood, and he wanted to build a big, gigantic castle. And he hadn't, finished his medical thing, and he didn't quite have the money, but he loved the place, so he rented that for a few years. And he was really an interesting guy. He was into the paranormal. Hey there, buddy. And Eden is with us, so is Jane. And so that guy was a guy named Dr. Stephen Greer. And so he rented my book. So that guy, he is the real deal in a lot of ways. He's very caught up in his own image. He wants to be the poster boy of disclosure. And he's like wrestling that out with David Wilcox. Right? And they're both doing pretty good work. They're both bringing out a lot of information, but they're both, stooges of the hidden hand. I mean, they're only being given the stuff that, you could find in a magazine, basically. And they don't quite put all the right dots together. Meaning they really don't talk about the big story, So, I mean, but they're doing good stuff. I don't put them down. And, David he's a funny guy. I like him. Stephen is a straight shooter, honest guy, good doctor. He was an emergency doctor. His family is great. His parents are really great. They come from that part of the country. I mean, he's really a great guy, but he's, it's like all those guys, they love being on the stage, I was on the stage, but it was like people only wanted to hear what they wanted to hear. They really didn't want to hear, and that's why I do this, because I'm the grid. I'm just telling you a story. And, didn't want that. And it wasn't hard. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, right? And then Stephen built his big castle, and, he got some drunk to wire it, so I had some more time with him wiring his big castle. And he did it in this place called Madison County, Bloody Madison. It's where they grow the herb, and they grow, they have the shine. They've had shine since the Civil War, and they have so much money. Those guys, they do a thing called, all the big growers and shiners have a thing called Spring Fling, where they each buy a Massey Ferguson big tractor, like farmer industrial tractor, that costs like, $30,000, $40,000, $60,000. And then during the winter, when they got spare time, they build a trebuchet to fling that tractor. And they each, to be part of the spring fling, you have to kick in 50 grand in the pot and about another 10 grand for the party, right? So they have about 10 guys that have that kind of money. And this party goes on for a week. And the first time I went there, they had the Allman Brothers as their band. And other bands that were just as good but lower on the feeding chain. And so they would throw the tractors with their trebuchet, and whoever got the furthest got the pot. So that's where Dr. Stephen had his castle. And between Stephen and getting to know these guys, they were building the extension of the 26 corridor up that mountain, right through Madison County. And these guys were so serious that when the alcohol ATF did not come and visit them. The FBI didn't, because these guys had more guns than those guys. They had tanks. And so when they were building that, and I was at doing my little ethnography for the city of Asheville, this guy came and visited because the federal building wasn't there. And they said, hey, listen, we're building this highway right up through here. And we would like you to go do your thing and talk to those people and see how, because we don't, we're kind of scared that if we go up there with our surveyors, they will just kill them, and there's not much we can do about it. So can you go up there? This is when I got my first little star on being a negotiator. I mean, I've been doing negotiating since I was 6, but for the federal government. And so I said, okay, sure. What are you going to pay me? So they gave me a nice number, and I said, okay, first, third, second, third. Okay, not a problem. So they gave me that and a car, because I didn't have a car really, not a car that would make it around there. So they gave me a nice car, 4-wheel drive, and I, a few of the people that I kind of knew, I had gone to one of those parties, the Spring Fling, and met a bunch of folk. And so I went up there and I did the St. Patrick's Day thing. Here it is, Tuesday, St. Patrick's Day. I'm, basically reliving St. Patrick's. And I went up there and I said, listen, these guys want to build this highway here, right? And they're concerned that you may not like it and will start, waging war on them, like you often do. So I think that this road would actually be really good for you. And I had like the top maps and, everything that showed exactly what they were going to do and how they were going to do it. And they're going to, put off ramps onto different things and put up roads. And they said that they would put these roads that they kind of want to take to someplace, any place that you want them. And, the things, when they chop into a mountain, have big boulders, they put in machines that kind of crush it down to lay down for the road. Well, they often have a great deal excess, and they usually just pile it around. And they said, you guys can take as much as that, for your own wishes as you want. And we will put the road wherever you want. And so they roll it out and go, yeah, this looks okay. And I say, this will be good for your business, transportation-wise, da-da-da-da. And they're still going to have the same attitude of not really bothering you. And they said, okay, not a problem. And so, the surveyors come in and lay it out, and they start taking down the trees. And the guys go, so we want those trees. And they said, fine, take the trees. So they took the trees, and they were mostly old growth, these oaks and maples, and really valuable, expensive trees, because they had sawmills. They were going to make money on this. So they did, and these guys would make money on everything. So they take the wood, and so the guys start, drilling their little test bore holes and stuff like that. And so they're probably into this project for, 10, 15 million, just to kind of do a setup. And they realize that where they were going to put the road was unfeasible, because the road would just slide off the mountain, right? So they're going to have to put it someplace else. So they had to go back to the drawing boards and do all that. Well, these guys have got all this land that is inaccessible from any other place, and they're going to, use it to grow, put greenhouses and grow like crazy. Not only do they make money on all that wood, They, now have land that's on federal land that's not federal land, and so it's like in limbo land. And because they were going to make it federal land if they put the highway there, but they're not going to put the highway there, so it's in limbo land. So no one owns it. No one's going to use it. These guys can grow as much as they want there. And so the guys realize they got to put it here where it won't fall off the mountain. And, they go on and build the highway. So these guys really loved me because they made a fortune on the wood. They got a thing. They got it more substantial. Okay, that their peace would if they don't start war on the building of the highway, that the peace treaty will continue. And so I've become their best friend, right? And so I go to more of their parties, which are bitching, and I Asheville, you have to realize, was a town. I got there in '91 and left in '98, basically, and it was a town that was in amber, meaning because it was a very rich town. They built Morris Astor's, the railroad, and the intelligentsia of America would spend their summers up there. And Asheville, the city, spent millions in the 20s to put roads in, to level up the city, to put septic lines and water lines and build the city county plaza and the tunnel through there was mountains around Asheville. That was the city of mountains. It was steeper. All the roads were like this. It made San Francisco look like a flat plain. And so they leveled it out. And how they leveled it out, they took it a thing from Newark. Newark leveled its city out because it was sinking into the swamp. And they put steel columns down to bedrock and then built the ground level about 50 feet. So old Newark is underneath New Newark. I went and saw it once when I was teaching at Newark College of Engineering. And they had, a big racial riot, which nearly burnt Newark to the ground. And so they had the tanks in the streets. And they had these things that were, in the old days, trolley cars, but everyone thought they were subways. Well, people didn't realize that they were trolley cars. And when this thing happened, the tanks were down in the old city underground, so nobody would burn the city down from underneath, which could have happened. Enough gasoline would have burnt Newark to the ground. So anyway, I was teaching at Newark College of Engineering, which was on College Street, and I used to live in the West Village and on Bank Street because I was a part of the Herbert Berghoff studio, and he had this little garret on top of his building that he let me stay in. And that's one reason why I don't have too much money is that I never built equity in properties, right? And when I started to do it, it was a little too late. And I was in Soho. I was in a lot of places that I had just a little cash and bought a building, I'd be a zillionaire. But I wouldn't be the guy I am today. And that's why I didn't. I lived like a millionaire. I didn't have to be one, right? Because all these people would let me stay in the most amazing places. And, if I had to own them, it would be pretty expensive. So anyway, I would walk downstairs, go to the French thing, have a croissant and a cappuccino with my good friend John Cale. And I would walk down the street to where the PATH train was. There was a PATH train in the frigging West Village. And I would get on that train and go straight to Newark and walk up one stack of things and go into the subway that I always thought was the subway and take that for a dime to New College Avenue and go upstairs and go to my office in Newark College of Engineering, which was above another college. It'll come to my mind. Pretty well-known fancy school in New Jersey. It has different campuses. Has great sports teams. Always goes to the March Madness. So you sportsters should know that. Just New Jersey College goes to March Madness. Yeah, Chippery. Awesome. Yeah, well, it's not 2 in the morning. It's not 10 at night. It's what time is it? Oh, look at that. It's 7. Anyway, and even though I'm not eating much, I'm not vomiting every time I think of food. So um, that's and what's coming up looks like it's known as sputum abulum, which is like you've got all these different systems in your body. And you have your cranial sacral and you have your pulmonary system, but you have other pneumatic systems that carry other fluids through your body. And that is what I'm spitting up is the fecal matter, not so much fecal matter, but the waste products of these systems. And I think my body is healing itself to a point where all the things that are wrong with me won't make me dead from this virus. So, it's a bit uncomfortable, but, it's good, Not eating, I'll lose probably 20 pounds, maybe more, and that'll be good for me. I'll be lighter on my feet. So anyway, when I'm, so I took the PATH train to Newark and got on the thing, and nobody told me not to do it. And I saw soldier guys walking around, but I didn't think twice. I went and got on the thing, and they had tanks down there with these super bright lights, searching for people who wanted to burn Newark down. And you could see that Newark, this wasn't a tunnel, it was all hollow underneath. That's what they did with Asheville. And so they spent all these millions of dollars, and then the Great Depression came and they couldn't pay anybody. And so, like the guy who put the septic system in was so pissed off, he burnt every lick of documentation of where Asheville's water and sewer lines are. So this day, Asheville probably has the most toxic, poisonous water in America because people are basically drinking their sewage. And the only thing they do to stop everyone from dying is adding more and more chlorine to it and putting it through ammonia. But all that does is, make the most virulent, healthy bugs stay alive. So you don't want to go to Asheville if you got a coming from out of city when you have a compromised immune system. Gonna vomit here. Just excuse me. That was pretty interesting. Ooh, I'm going to cover myself up. Gave me the shivers. I vomited up these long black strings that were didn't like those being in me. From my experience, the rich have no personality whatsoever, except greed, and that isn't a personality. I mean, they can't hold. So, my path of my conversation has been all over the place. So, I was telling you about my parents having this, gated golfing community down in Florida, about 20 miles from Stuart, Florida. And the last years of their life, I spent a lot of time there taking care of them, driving around, getting their doctors, getting people to take care of them, etc. And so I used to go, so they were paying $200 a month to eat at the clubhouse and at the other restaurants that were there. So I ate there. My parents didn't. They'd go there once, they get all fancy dressed up to show off how rich they were. And they'd be, freaked out. And people come over and go kiss them on the cheek because my dad had been the best golfer there. And my mom was like the queen. And she played bridge like a rocket scientist, to the point where the ladies said, Wilma, you can't play, because they would play for my money, and my mom, for 12 years, won every frigging game. So, and my mom had this amazing way to make everyone feel lower than she was, right? And also scared of her. So, when she couldn't move around that easily anymore, she stopped playing bridge. And because it was uncomfortable for her, because she had to be driven there, she couldn't drive. She had to either be in a wheelchair or a walker, which was really uncomfortable. Her legs really hurt when she walked, even with a walker. So she stopped playing. And no one came to visit her. No one came. No. So, but I would go to the dining room, right? And there was this tape. So you're not supposed to tip the help. And I would always, leave a $10 under the plate, right? And so everyone in that whole place loved me, and when somebody came to fix something, I'd give them a tip. When the security guy needed to do something, I'd give him a tip. Everyone got a tip, except the upper echelon who would get upset, right? So I would go have lunch there, and they'd have a big table for me, and it was like off to the corner, but it was in a beautiful spot. We could look right out into the golf course, and there was these fountain with, and it was kind of walled in somewhat. I mean, it wasn't, but to the point where they would leave this big window open. It was screened, and the breeze of the ocean would come off the golf course, and the sound of the water was great. It was great. No one ever went in there before me. I don't know, but because you couldn't see anybody, you couldn't see me in there. And I would bring a big suitcase of books and scatter them out. And I spend the whole afternoon there, right? And I'd write and I'd read and I'd do my research, and it had really good Wi-Fi, so I could do my desperate lawyer work there. And and then I would go pack it up, and they actually had a little piece of furniture they moved in that I could stick things in and lock. So I would put my books in there and whatever I was writing. So people started to notice that, they knew who I was. My father was one of the first guys there, and he always won the golf championships. Anyway, so they kind of knew me. And I was always in the pool, and I was always in the sauna, and I was always in the steam room. And so I got to talk to all these. That's why I learned one of the most important things in corporate life: golf, steam room, gym, right? So I would, use the jacuzzi down there and the steam room and the sauna and talk to these guys about everything, right? And they would go, wow, I know, they were the richest, stupid people I ever met. And that's who's running our, Donald Trump, the most stable genius. Right? Now, he's got street smarts, that guy. But, And he has certain experience because his father, his Uncle John, was the scientist who went into Tesla's apartment first and went through all the. I mean, he was one of the guys who were working on time travel at Brookhaven National Laboratory. I mean, I heard stories about him, and his mentor was the head honcho of everything science in the United States since World War II till like the 90s. So, I mean, the guys on Mars, and so Donald must know about all that stuff. So that's why he started the Space Force, which is already in existence. It's called Solar Warden. It's known by many names. But anyway, so that was my little library away from my parents and away from TV. My dad always had a TV on. And I could get anything to eat any way I wanted, The chef would come in and what do you want for lunch today? And the other guys just ate off the buffet. The chef, who was getting prepared for dinner, would come and make me whatever I want. Said, oh, what's your best fish? Oh, we have lobster to have, big lobster. Out of the shell, everything, He had this thing called a lobster pile. It was about this high with, maybe 3 or 4 lobsters all cracked out and all the meat, right, cooked and prepared and bathed in butter and pretty yummy. And that was my favorite. And he had other things that were pretty good. And I would, saunter through the buffet because the buffet was just lots of great vegetables, sweets. He was a great baker. But he liked to sit down and talk about poetry because I always wanted to be a poet. And so we would talk about his favorite poets and I would deconstruct them because that's my favorite thing to do. And he loved that, So he would take this little break and he'd bring over he had this lemon jello, which is a Italian lemon, liqueur. And it really, it's like drinking LSD, 2 glasses of that. He would have little glasses. He would bring me a pretty large glass with ice cubes. It's always good on ice. And it was very tasty and right? So we'd really talk about stuff. So that's what I do. I talk to everybody. I get them into a space outside their space, and they really feel good about that. Right? That's why you guys are here. Whereas rich people, they don't have any space to go to, right? And so when the '08 collapse happened, I was with my parents, and my dad, so he had his 2 major investments were these 2 properties. And he had to, when my dad died, my sisters auctioned that $2 million, $3 million house for $40,000. And I went to the guy who wanted to build the big house on that corner. I said, Mary, don't do this. Let's just go to the sky. And said, oh, no, we have to do it for this lady and blah, blah. I said, no, but she's so nice. Well, what she tried to do was buy the property herself and then sell it to that guy. I was going to make sure that didn't happen. If it was going to go to Lois, it was going to go to that guy, because this woman was a real. Anyway, and my parents' house in North Carolina, which could have been, the guy gave I'll give you $12 million for this. We sold it a year later for $300,000. And we would have sold it, my sisters would have auctioned that off too for nothing. But the guy who grew up in that neighborhood and who was a lawyer, I kind of knew him, and he really loved the house. And he was the guy who offered that much money. And my sister didn't even take his name. And I had his name, and I knew who he was. So when my sisters were thinking about auction, I said, wait a minute, let me find the guy who really wanted to buy it, see what he'd pay for it. So I went to him and said, listen, I know this is the worst part of the market. You probably lost half your net worth, but you really like that house. What would you pay for it? It's $300,000. He sold it for $300,000. So my dad, he's his whole life, as he was becoming a millionaire, when I die, you'll all be millionaires. No, not so much. He lost about 80% of his net worth in about 2 months. Anyway, that's my dad. He's got pretty good luck, but he doesn't go with his gut. or he goes with his gut and he has no luck, one or the other. And he always was reaching for the wrong gold ring. Instead of happiness and the self-betterment of his family, he wanted to be a millionaire and be thought of as a millionaire and have millionaires as friends. Well, he lived in a place surrounded by millionaires. They really weren't his friends, you know. They liked him because he could play golf and because my mom could beat their wives in cards, right? So, but like I said, when I got sick for a year and a half, there wasn't a single person to come to visit. How you doing? Do you need anything? You know. So when the market really crashed, and I was sitting in that back side room, enjoying the breeze and the scent of the hibiscus and all the other flowers that they put there to be smelled. But all those rich people wanted to be in air conditioning, so they never kept the windows I could open. And the breeze was very comfortable, even when it was ridiculously hot and humid. So I remember this one guy coming in, and he goes, you know, I come to lunch here almost every day for the last 20 years. And pretty much I sit with the same guys. They tell me the same stories. And I'm bored out of my mind. Now, you know, I hear all these stories about you and what you do. And that you come over to this little thing and you got your little library over there and you're writing stuff and you're thinking about stuff. And so what are you thinking about? And I started to talk to him about it. And he said, oh. And this guy was one of the members of the Federal Reserve. He was the Denver office, which is a pretty important office. and you know, I said, so how could you? And then a couple of days later, he brought in his best friend who also lived there, who was a retired senator. And this guy was instrumental on killing the Glass-Steagall Act, which enabled the banking community to go hog wild on derivatives and, you know, destabilize the whole banking institution to the point that it collapsed. So here are the two guys who were probably most instrumental in causing the economic collapse of '08 and what's happening now, right? Because they were on boards of directors and all kinds of things. And I followed their careers until they died. And they did nothing to change anything, right? And so they, you know, I said, so why'd you do this, you know? Well, he said, well, you know, it's a great advantage for the finances of America. I said, no, it's a great advantage for you to be a billionaire when you were just a millionaire. Weren't you satisfied with being a millionaire? And he goes, well, you know, everybody else was doing it. And I said the thing that my mom would say. So if everybody else was jumping off the bridge, which they are now, he was not really apologetic at all. And then we went more into philosophic, in which they had no concept of empathy or any of the plutocratic reasoning or Socratic reasoning or any of the ancient Eastern mystics that all talk about greed and envy and ego, you know. And you know, they more or less wanted to hear fun stories to get, you know, to be a distraction. And when they said that, I said, you know, guys, I'm busy. See you later. So they had a like secret cabal of the most wealthiest guys there, and they would have a morning breakfast, a brunch. And they started inviting me. And this is when I was really sick. And my parents had already died, and my sisters wanted me, because the house was covered in shit. My dad would shoot shit everywhere, and he wouldn't wear diapers, and it was pretty smelly. And you know, he never spent any money. Once he fixed it up in the, you know, 1970s, he never spent a nickel on it. I mean, he had the crappiest furniture, crappiest beds, because he didn't want anybody to stay there, you know. And if he stayed there, he wanted you to be miserable. You know, my mom and him had a nice bed, but I had, you know, the other three beds. He had 3 bedrooms for what was left of his kids, and they all were two twin beds that were stuck together, and you would sleep on it. And he had it because he, and they were stuck together like they were. But the sheets, the big sheet over it was a king size sheet, but the mattresses were covered with twin mattresses. Covers. And so if you slept on it and you rolled a lot, like I do, it would do this, and you would end up on the floor. And my dad knew this. And he didn't put any comfortable seats anywhere in the house. You were always like either sinking way down into it so you could never get out, or you were, and that was my dad. He wanted everyone to be uncomfortable, right? Unless he was the star of the show. He's kind of like Donald Trump in a lot of ways, but he didn't grow up with a wealth, so he had to make his money. He actually did make his money. He actually worked hard for his money. So anyway, so I was taken to and there were three more members of the Federal Reserve. So there were 6 members of the Federal Reserve of this cabal, and 2 other investment type of folks who ran, hidden trusts, gaslights, and I was there. And it was really interesting because I told the head at Mater D about, what I did. He goes, "So what do you really do?" And I said, "Oh, I work, I'm a consultant, and I work for desperate lawyers when they have disagreements. I go in and negotiate." And I told him how I did it. So the one morning I showed up for their brunch, he had this thing set out with cold coffee, like Sanka, not even real coffee, and bagels and Danish and things that were like 3 weeks old, that they forgot to throw out. And he put them up there nicely. And he and they all were sitting in the crappiest seats they had in that whole place. He kind of put them in that thing. And he took out, so they had like little TV dinner trays, because I told him about this. And I don't know where he got the TV dinner trays. But I had this like king chair, leather chair, and I had a nice table over here of really yummy, freshly baked Danish, and I had a slab of fresh bagels toasted with Nova and schmear, and just enough for me. And he kept coming in, refilling my cappuccino cup, and brought me an omelet, and he wouldn't do anything for the rest of those guys. And I had 2 metal braces on my legs. And, because at that time I'd gotten really sick. And the only thing keeping me alive were the doctors who my parents went to over the years that I got to know really well. And after being, taken care of by my lawyer, for 3 weeks, and colonics and that kind of stuff, I wasn't too far from a number of those practitioners who that lawyer was still paying for. And I was going to these other doctors who were, bone doctors and podiatrists and endocrinologists and guys like that. And so I was getting it from both ends. And luckily that lawyer guy was paying my bill, because it ran up into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It would have if both sides liked me. The alternative guys liked me, and I gave them insights about certain things in their lives. And the other guys who I drove my parents, they made enough money off my parents in the 15 years that I drove them to their doctors, and made their job easier, because I knew exactly what was wrong with them. I would keep notes like a nurse would on my parents, and when we'd go see their doctor, I would have that made for him, and he would go, "Oh, okay, bitch, okay." So all his hard work was already done. He just had to, do his little prognostication and then, give them drugs. And so, and I'd always keep them amused and give them insights on this, that, the other thing, right? So, and my parents liked the guinea pigs. And so they took care of me. again for like half price, and my lawyer friend. But I was in a bad way. I mean, I was like, 4 weeks from these guys almost cracked my chest and did a quadruple bypass and cut my legs off. So I had metal braces on my legs. I was always kind of out of breath. I was like on that edge of, he's going to slip off. And the only thing that was keeping me alive was the knowledge that my, masters in the higher realms wanted me still here, and that I would get better, and that this was a lesson to not do that again. Right. So, and I'm still in that lesson. I'm just, 12 years on. Because I was really sick then, and I didn't really almost die in the plate of spaghetti until a while later. And it was touch and go until 2014, when from 2011 until 2014, I should actually stop talking about this. I gotta lean over the toilet bowl again. Well, look at that. We've almost been here for 4 hours. What do you guys think here? The kind of personality rich people have? None. Whose grandma? My grandma. Oh, my clothes in the dryer. Buddy once said, when it's done drying, it keeps beeping until you open the door. And he said, "Who's in the iron lung?" Or what did you say, buddy? You said something funny. Yeah, the fairies use hedgerows and gateways. Gateways go through time and space. Thank you, Jane. I always like telling a good story. It's the dryer bleeping. That's Grandma. Buddy said it sounded like a heart-lung machine. It's beeping, telling me that it's getting dry, and that means it's done. And it'll keep beeping until I open the door and take it out. People are getting so stupid that they need that. Anyway, the end of the story here is it's same as it always was. And what we have to do is build a new old aesthetic of love's co-creation. Right? And, Mr. Eden there, you are close to the fairies. You understand the hedgerow